I'd like to call the meeting of the City of Lakewood Planning Commission for September 6th, 2018 together, the regular meeting at 7 p.m. Caitlin, would you please read the roll call?
Mr. Baker? Mr. McMahon?
Present.
Mr. Gatos? Mr. Coyne?
Here.
Ms. Rossiter? Here.
I would entertain a motion to excuse the distinguished chairman, Mr. Gatos.
I would move to excuse Mr. Gatos.
I'll second.
Moved in second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries. Thank you.
Wish him speedy recovery.
The next item on our agenda is to approve the minutes from the August 2nd, 2018 meeting. Hopefully the members have all had a chance to read through those. When you're prepared, I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I move to approve.
Motion and second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And Caitlin, I will abstain since I missed the meeting. Motion carries 3-0, one abstention. Opening remarks, Caitlin.
Good evening and welcome to Lakewood Planning Commission meeting. The commission is made up of 5 members charged with evaluating proposals as required by Lakewood Zoning Code and Community Vision. The charter of the city establishes the authority of the commission and that it shall be made up of 5 members. Members of the commission are volunteer Lakewood residents appointed to 6-year terms by the mayor and city council. Please be respectful in your conversations with them. Tonight, the commission shall hear testimony from each applicant making presentation for their docket item. The commission may also take public comment for each docket item, and public commentary shall only address that specific docket item being considered. Public comment shall be limited to 3 minutes per person and will be shown on the timer up front. While you are welcome to state your agreement with prior commentary that has been made, please make an effort to provide new comments you find relevant to the commission, as time is limited and the commission welcomes a variety of viewpoints and diversity of information. You may submit statements, feelings, or concerns in writing to the secretary to have them included as a matter of public record. Anyone addressing the commission tonight will please sign the oath and state your name and address for the record prior to addressing the commission.
Thank you very much. The first item on our agenda for business in the business section is new business. We are being asked to consider conditional use. Docket number is 092418. The address is 14233 Detroit Avenue, and the applicant is requesting a conditional use for a body art establishment. I would like to ask the applicant to please come to the podium, sign in, state your name, present your request. Good evening.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tony DiRigo. Okay. I've never done this before like this, so.
If you would just summarize the request that you'd like us to consider, please.
A tattoo shop. I've been in business in Elyria for 24 years. I have a shop in Cleveland Heights that's 3 years old. And just looking to, add to Lakewood. I'm not sure what I need to say, but do you want to know about the property?
That's good. Well, the staff will tell us a little bit about that, and we may have some questions for you.
Okay.
But, yeah, you've given us the background we needed to get started.
Okay.
So, yeah, thank you. So now I would ask the staff to give us some background on the request, please.
Yeah, so the request is for a conditional use for a body art establishment. This is 116103Z, which requires single-use instruments, the owner to have no less than 3 years of experience, liability insurance of at least $1 million, no electronic signage, hours maximum of 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., and a waste handled through a qualified contractor. This is the location at Olivewood in Detroit. It's nearby Edible Arrangements. It is within a proper zoning area for a body art establishment and outside of any buffers from existing establishments. The space that has been submitted is 900 square feet with the site plan here, so there is no parking required for this size of business. Some photos of the existing business. I believe this one's in Cleveland Heights.
This is Lucky Sparrow
Okay.
in Cleveland Heights, yeah.
And this is the space.
Thank you very much. Initially, do any of the planning commission members have questions before we hear public comment?
I do, Mr. Chair. You'll have 3 locations. How are you going to split your time? How are you going to staff the 3 locations?
I have several artists on hand.
So how many expect to be in Lakewood? How often?
Probably 2 to 4 with, one of them being a body piercer.
What about volume of customers do you anticipate at this site? If you, kind of based on your other businesses?
I would say 5 to 15 per day as far as tattoos, piercings. That's remained to be seen, We haven't been, I don't know how Lakewood is with piercing anymore, but I don't think there's anybody doing it, so I expect it to be good.
And then what about, I think the hours are, you can be open till 9. Is that, do you think every day, 7 days a week can be open?
It would probably be Monday through Saturday, 12 to 8 for sure. Yeah.
Who's your waste hauler then? Who do you use in, is one of the conditions is a qualified waste hauler?
Well, I haven't developed one for here. In Lorraine County, we use the health department there.
Okay, that was my question.
Okay.
Do you do that in Cleveland Heights then too? You use the health department in Cleveland Heights? Or who do you?
I'm going to approach that.
Okay.
Oh, you mean Cleveland Heights?
Yes, sir.
No, we use it through, not the city, but,
Cuyahoga County?
yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
I had a question. Okay, well, right now, we're going to ask the public if we can give any public comments, so we'll ask you to step aside.
Okay.
And we will invite anybody from the public who has any comments on the request before us, the conditional use for the body art establishment, to come
Thank you.
forward. Seeing none, we will close the public comment on this item. And since you just left, you get to come right back. I will, while you're coming back, note that we have we have not received any letters from residents on this one. So back to the staff. Is there anything else that we need to know from you?
Mr. Chair, we don't have any concerns on this applicant, as long as they meet these requirements of 116103Z.
So prior to giving them the permit to open, you would make sure that all of these are met?
Correct.
Okay. Members, any other discussion from Planning Commission? If not, I will open the floor for a motion.
I'll move to approve this item.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much.
Thanks so
you.
much.
Thank you.
The second item that we're going to be dealing with tonight is a plan development, docket number 092818, and its address is 14519 Detroit Avenue, 1 Lakewood Place.
Good evening, everybody.
And
Good Lord.
thank you for waking us up. And the request before us is for a plan development rezoning, and my understanding is we're going to first have a presentation from the city as an introduction before the applicant comes up and makes a presentation. Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening to the commission members, and good evening to everybody in the public that's here tonight for this project and for others. My name is Bryce Sylvester. I'm the Director of Planning and Development here at the city. And I'm really excited to be here in front of you tonight at what is a very important step for a project that our community has been working on for quite some time. Tonight marks the first step in what we're calling the community planning process for One Lakewood Place, which is the mixed-use development being proposed at the former hospital site. I say community planning process because we're really having this be the beginning of what we believe to be is going to be a several-month process in rooms just like this, where we're in front of a formal body like the Planning Commission or the Architectural Board of Review, which is the case next Thursday, but also in front of community groups like Lakewood Alive, the Chamber of Commerce, working closely with the neighbors on Bell and Marlowe at community meetings, and also holding larger community meetings outside of City Hall to incorporate feedback on this project. So our plan is to use the feedback and engagement in those rooms and directly incorporate it into the discussions that you're having. As we'll talk about ad nauseum tonight, what's in front of the commission is related to land use. The commission's role in our community is to help ensure that we're implementing the community's vision and really focusing on land use decisions. And so that's what you can expect the conversation to be about tonight. Mr. Chair, I wanted to take a couple minutes and just introduce the developer and their architects and also a few members of our team that'll speak tonight. So again, I'm Bryce Sylvester. I'm the Director of Planning. We have George Papandreou right here to my left from Carnegie Development Corporation. Ron Lloyd to his left from RDL Architecture. And David Parrish also from RDL Architecture. You'll be hearing from all of them tonight. To my right is Caitlin Milius, City Planner at City Hall. Jen Swallow, the Assistant Director of Law for the City of Lakewood. Mark Papke, the City's Engineer. And Mike Malinsky, the City Architect and Building Commissioner. The reason I wanted to introduce everybody tonight is this project is a little different than some that come in front of this group, in that the city is really a partner of the developer and the architects on this project. And so you'll have an opportunity to hear from both our partners at Carnegie and RDL, and you'll also get to hear from some of our staff at the city. Kaylin, if you could go to the next slide. What I wanted to do first was just sort of set some expectations about what we're going to go over tonight. And Glenn, you did a nice job kicking us off. So my role is to introduce the project. I'm quickly going to turn it over to Caitlin to walk through the components of the Plan Development Zoning Code, the formal request that's in front of the Planning Commission and the ABR. Next, we're going to turn it over to Carnegie and RDL to present their updated plans. Following that, we're going to turn it over to Mike Malinsky to talk a little bit about how he sees the world with related to constructive feedback on this project. We're going to turn it over to Planning Commission to talk through questions and feedback that you have upon first pass of the project. We're going to then open it up for public comment and questions. We'll then turn it back over to the developer, the Planning Commission, and the city to work through discussion of those comments and questions and then wrap up. You'll hear this a number of times, but there's going to be no formal action tonight other than a deferral. So we're not voting yay or nay on the project tonight. Again, this is just the start of the process. If you can go to the next slide, Caitlin, that'd be great. So I've walked through some of this, but I think it's important to continue to explain the process that's ahead. Again, we'll be in rooms like this with the Planning Commission, and we'll be scheduling meetings in the coming months with neighbors in Marlowe and Bell, broader community meetings, and meetings with organizations like Lakewood Alive, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Downtown Lakewood Business Alliance. Our conversation tonight, as I stated before, is going to be focused on land use. Broad topics that we'll talk about tonight is the approach to the design. Why is the site laid out the way that it is? When were those decisions made and how were they made? We're going to review the site plan that's proposed in front of us. We're going to talk about some of the basic building massing and even topics like traffic circulation. At this stage, all of the polish and the renderings that maybe you've seen leading up to this point have been stripped away. And that's very much on purpose. we wanted to go back to the basic building blocks of the site plan and the massing so that input in rooms like this can begin to influence decisions related to the design. So what you're going to see tonight may look basic, but it's going to set us up to have more productive and constructive dialogue over the coming months related to this project. Lastly, something you're going to hear tonight and all throughout the community planning process is our reference of what we're calling the development objectives. We've printed out hard copies. They're over here on the table to the right in case you haven't seen those. Those 13 development objectives were created from a community meeting back in August of 2015 and then utilized throughout this entire process to get us to today to sort of guide the entire project. We're going to continue to come back to that in rooms like this to stay on track for this project. One thing I wanted to address on some questions we received leading up to the meeting today is related to communication. So how do I find out what's going on with this project? The first and best resource is our website, www.onelakewood.com/downtown development. On that page, there is an email sign-up list. It's on the right-hand side when you go to that page. You put in your name and your email, and we're going to utilize that listserv to update the community, anybody that's on that list, about upcoming meetings and updates about the project. This website will also sort of be the repository for information. So if you need to see the site plan, for example, that's proposed tonight, it'll be posted on the website by tomorrow. If you want to see plans that are presented in front of the Architectural Board of Review next Thursday, we'll be posting that to the website. So that's sort of the homepage for this project, and we'll do our best to continue to update it as the months go along. We also send letters out for meetings just like this, the Planning Commission and the ABR. Those letters, so the Commission knows, have been sent out to the properties that are on the same block of the property. So we pretty much are using Marlowe and Bell up to Franklin to send those public notices. To be clear, the code only requires us to send notices to the abutting and the abutting to the abutting property owners. We recognize that that's not enough to notify, especially related to this project. So we have extended that public notice up to Franklin. I would say the best way to find out information about this is to sign up for the email list and make sure to stay engaged on the website. We're also going to be posting all the updates on social media. We absolutely recognize that not everybody uses social media, so we're going to continue, sorry about that, to use other means to communicate to the public. Next slide, Caitlin. So the one item I did want to address before I turn it over to Caitlin to walk us through some of the plan development zoning information are some very pointed questions we've received in the last 24 hours that I need to make very, very clear leading up to this project. There is no eminent domain proposed on this project, and there will be no eminent domain related to this project, period. It's that simple. So if that comes up in a question tonight, or if members of the public hear that out in the community, I would ask that you carry this message forward. The proposed project is primarily in the property that the city owns, which is the former Lakewood Hospital property. Mr. Chair, I did want to address that because that's an emotional phrasing to use, and it is absolutely not true. So I need to make sure that we address that on the front end. So with that, I do want to turn it over to Caitlin to walk us through the plan development process and kind of talk through what the code's telling us, and then we'll turn it over to Carnegie and our friends at RDL to walk us through the project. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Bryce.
Thanks.
Caitlin, you need to stay there?
Yes, so the
Okay.
plan development approval process, we are on step 1 of the process tonight with a review of the preliminary plan. This is a multi-month process, as Bryce mentioned, that involves both Planning Commission, Architectural Board of Review, and City Council approval. So we have preliminary approvals and then final approvals from all the boards. So we would expect multiple meetings on each of these 5 items. The request tonight is a preliminary plan review. We're not asking for approval at this point, but we want to have great conversations around this item. The commission's role is to review the applications for the preliminary plan development plans. And this really focuses on lot size, floor area ratio, structure height, residential setbacks, building line setbacks, and site circulation. So those are some of the items that Planning Commission would consider in this preliminary review. The purpose of the planned development zoning chapter is to promote projects that are innovative, those that are integrated with their surroundings, and really projects that meet our community vision goals. So things like a more compact development, pedestrian-friendly site design, urban street character, energy-efficient design, and industry best practices. Along with our community vision, which we hold as a value system, we have these development objectives that we have used throughout the throughout the process for the downtown development. There are 13 of these. They were given in the first RFQ that the developers saw, and the RFP as well. So these are our touchstone throughout the project to make sure we are addressing a variety of items. These were created in a public meeting in August of 2015 with the input of the community. So these are really from the community of what they'd like to see on this site. To highlight a few, creatively integrate visionary architecture sympathetic to the surrounding character of the neighborhood, activate the streetscape, incorporate a multifunctional outdoor community gathering space, sensitivity to the directly adjacent single-family neighborhood, environmentally sustainable development practices, provide a variety of housing types, and recognize and restate the historical significance of the site for the community. Some example requirements of the planned development zoning chapter are building and site designs, considering building materials, vehicular circulation and access. We will be requiring and will receive a traffic impact study as part of this process. So these things are still in progress. Pedestrian access and circulation, parking, both the visual impact and quantity, landscaping, signage, and lighting. A lighting plan, including photometric illustration, will be required at some point, but won't be looked at tonight as part of this first part of the project. So at this point, we'll probably turn it over to the applicant to present.
Okay, before we do that, is there any questions from the members of the commission about what we've heard so far? Okay, thank you very much. Just to clarify, the community vision is a citywide guiding document.
Correct.
And the development objectives that appear on this page are specific to this site that have been put together as part of.
Specific to this site and this project, correct.
Gentlemen, who's going to begin from your team? All right, come on up. And again, if you wouldn't mind, for the benefit of the public, stating your name and
Certainly,
telling us who you're with.
certainly. And by the way, thank you for the introduction, Bryce. That was well done. And good evening, members of Planning Commission and other distinguished representatives of the city and the residents. We thank you very much for the opportunity to be here tonight before you. My name is George Papandreas. I am Executive Vice President of Carnegie Management and Development Corporation. I am the project executive with oversight on this project. And as I mentioned, we're really honored and excited to be here tonight on what we know is going to be the first night of many where we work towards a proposal, a final design for this project that we call One Lakewood Place. We anticipate that this will be a process that will help identify the program for the project, along with the influence of the marketplace and the experience that we intend to bring to it because of the skill that our team has not the least of which is the fact that, as indicated before, we have RDL as our architects and Turner as our contractor. Benke is also the landscape architect, primarily dealing with the common areas for the project. But talking about the team, I'd be remiss not to try and express to you a little bit about who Carnegie is and what some of their qualifications are as the developer on this project. Carnegie is a full-service real estate development company. We've been around for over 35 years. We're locally owned. We're headquartered in Westlake, Ohio. We are an asset-based company, and our business model, which I think is really fundamental to this project, is one in which we hold the asset long-term. Now, why do I think that's important? Well, I think it's important for this particular project because it brings an element of continuity, it brings an element of accountability, and it also brings an element where we are going to have to live with during the management and the ownership of that project with everything that we ultimately agree upon as a team here throughout this entire process. And I think that's an important consideration whenever you're dealing. This is not some kind of a project where we're going to go in, do the design, flip it, somebody else comes along, and all of a sudden they're like, well, what promises were made before aren't really going to be part of what we're trying to do today. So our team responded to an RFP that was put out by the city of Lakewood that we thought was very, very comprehensively and well-conceived, and it identified, as we started to discuss before, this concept of the development objectives. And the development objectives are really what we consider to be front and center to how we would respond to this. And that's how we evolved or entered into a design that we initially came up with for this project. In so doing, we really had to identify what we felt was a vision. And that vision was initially represented in what you've probably already seen and what we're talking about not discussing here tonight. But I think it's important to understand what we were trying to accomplish in that regard when we identified this One Lakewood Place that we came up with as a name. And it was a vision that would reflect the past, present, and future heritage of Lakewood. It would end up being a focal point for the community, where there would be the combination of the social, the cultural, the economic, the entertainment, and residential relaxation activities all converged. It's true to a civic focal point that One Lakewood Place, we believe, needs to be. We felt it was a vision that needed to reflect the historic character and concerns of the community while integrating seamlessly into the fabric of that neighborhood. That involves designing in a manner that gives us flexibility, yet remains sensitive to the concerns of the community, a design that's flexible enough for us to address the demands of the marketplace, while at the same time being available to address the concerns and issues that any development process may pose. So, in addition to that, one of the things that we felt was fundamental was this concept of creating a design that had a symbiotic mix of uses. And the reason we did that was because we felt that was very, very important to create a synergy that would ultimately become the economic engine that we're trying to generate here with this particular type of project and the type of land use and the type of densities and the types of characters that you're going to see as we evolve through this whole planning process. While we came up with this concept, it was one that was, in many ways, at a high conceptual level, putting together a variety of building blocks, but with a low level of detail. And we did that intentionally, and I'm going to reiterate some of the things that Bryce had mentioned before, but I think it's important for you to hear from us. And we did that so that we could be in a position to deconstruct it, if you will, and start from the beginning in a way, not necessarily a blank canvas in its entirety, because we do recognize through our experience that there are some fundamental issues that we're going to need to try and address in order to maintain the synergy and the viability of the project. But in so doing, what we're trying to establish is an understanding of the character of the site. And in that understanding, it involves what we look at from a very macro point of view, a blocking, if you will, an identification of what was important about the characteristics of the site. And for us, when you looked at the site, It was very linear in its orientation, with to the north it abutting Detroit Avenue, and to the south, virtually deep into a residential neighborhood. That kind of concern, that kind of integration brought to mind how we had to establish a hierarchy in how we approached the design. And this was a hierarchy that recognized the fact that along Detroit Road, you have the most public aspect of the project, because clearly that's one of the main corridors down through the city. As you progress south, it becomes less public, becomes a little bit more private, semi-private, until you get to the southern boundary, when it becomes the most private because of its orientation in relationship to the surrounding neighborhood. So having said that, one of the things that we want to keep in mind were certain project goals. In addition to the development objectives, which are absolutely crucial and which we're going to keep in mind, we had, in our own effort, what we felt were important project goals to keep. One of them was to keep a project that remained viable. We certainly don't want a project that fails. We want a project that is something that the city can be proud of long term. We wanted a project that would generate jobs, improve the tax base, would help parking and provide a variety of transportation for both vehicular and pedestrian, would be a project that's sustainable in every way, one that was sensitive to the delicate fabric, as we mentioned before, understanding the architectural scale, the materials, the texture of the surrounding neighborhood, and at the same time, being sensitive to whatever those concerns that are being raised by the community. So hearing what the community says also was a goal of ours, and again, reiterating what was earlier said, we understand that process, and that's one of the reasons why today the first step that we're embarking upon is one that we want to take in a very generalized fashion, fundamental fashion that identifies these basic building blocks. So having said all of that, what I'd like to say, this was a brief introduction, but I think it's appropriate at this point for us to probably take it to the next level. Let RDL, as our architect, explain some of the details and characteristics of the plans that you're going to see before you that identify how we try to address the massing and some of these concerns and keep what we believe to be a vision, but yet set the platform and stage for the community involvement, the city involvement, the advisory boards, and whatever the recommendations may be, so that together we can hopefully evolve and generate a project that we're all going to be very, very proud of, and that ultimately we can get approved for our benefits, so that we can commence construction in a timely fashion. So having said that, I'd like to turn it now over to David Parrish, who is our architect in charge, and for his further explanation of the project. Thank you.
David, before you get started, if I may, just to clarify, Bryce, this presentation will be on the website that you gave earlier tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yes.
So folks, we don't have to have everybody taking photos of every shot of every screen. We'll have this posted tomorrow, the entirety. So if you wanted to refresh it tomorrow, it'll be up there on the website that you gave. That's correct?
You got it.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think that was a great introduction by George. Really kind of paints the picture that we've been starting to work on. And tonight, like everyone's saying, we're not going to bring you a lot of detail tonight. We're just going to start to frame the canvas. And there we go. RDL started working on this project a few months ago, and in putting this together, we looked at sort of what are the basics. What are the basics of the site? I mean, it's such an amazing site. I grew up in Lakewood, so I have a special fondness to this property. I was born on the top floor of the hospital, and I still want to get that tour before you tear the thing down. But obviously, as everyone knows, the site is in the heart of the city, and it's very closely related and very convenient to just about everything in the city. Particularly, accessibility to the freeway, accessibility to some of the major amenities of the city, all over. some technical difficulties here. What am I doing wrong? There we go. Thank you. That's better. Which one? Oh. Ha! Thank you. Sort of, how did we address sort of the problem in front of us? There was a number of things, but primarily is, and what I want to say, you know, Bryce and Caitlin spent a lot of time talking about the development objectives. We fully, through this design process, we fully intend to address all of those development objectives. But for tonight, sort of in this overview, we really just wanted to come up with a simple solution to a very complex problem. That's in essence this project. The site is sort of long and linear. It's sort of unique in that the low point of the site is right here at Detroit and Bell. And let's say if that's 0, the high point of the site is here, and that's plus 24. It's 24 feet taller from one end to the other. And to further complicate things, transverse from the low point here to the high point here at Marlow is 8 feet higher. So we almost have a two-way warp going. So that added to the challenge in how we try to layer the different uses to what will eventually seamlessly flow as you go through the project. From a program standpoint, the program is pretty much as has been, you know, since Carnegie was selected. Approximately 80,000 square feet of retail on 2 levels. Approximately 100,000 square feet of office space, an 800-car parking garage, and approximately 200 residential units. From a functionality standpoint, I think one of the things that George indicated was the site is split up into thirds. The front third, or the northernmost, is sort of the commercial district, the most public. Within that is this half-acre plaza that we will be developing right here at the corner of Bell. I mean, it's really going to become just an amazing public space. Working around there, the retail will wrap that public space with 2 levels, approximately in this location. And then as you transition from this commercial space, there will be only one vehicular access point through the property. That's where you will enter the site and go either into the parking garage to park your car, or a truck could come in and service these potential restaurants here to the west, or here if this is a large retail tenant that might need a drop-off or a parcel pickup or things of that sort, we thought that could be located here. Deliveries, I won't get into detail tonight, but deliveries, how would that happen? We looked at a number of ways to accomplish that, and we felt the best way to do that would be to make it the least noticeable, was to conceal it behind the Curtis Block building and just tuck it in between the Curtis Block and the retail here. The truck could access and back in and then back out, and it would never go south of this point. So it would not affect the single-family residence. We'd keep it essentially in the commercial district. So moving to the center section, the semi-private zone, is where we're proposing the 800-car parking garage. But the good news is that parking garage is not going to be it's not going to be visible, really, to the, what did I do now? Thank you. I can't talk with my hands. I guess anyway, the plan is to, I mean, an 800-car parking garage is a pretty big element, and our plan is to conceal that parking garage with single-family residential on 3 sides. The side along the vehicular artery would be open. So if you were going along, you could see through, and we've got some renderings that will show that to you later on. But that parking garage will be pretty much screened on 3 sides. And then as we go to the totally private zone is where we're going to locate the majority of the 200 residential units. That would be made up of different types of residential units. I think it's important to not have just one type of unit times 200. I think a rich diversity, what we've learned is a rich diversity of unit type would be the most marketable. I think it would be the most attractive, and it would bring a nice, variety of tenant. And that would be made up of, as I indicated, single-loaded liner units here around the parking deck, the actual apartment building itself, and then on the outer ring would be what we call stacked flats. They would be little 3-story residential buildings with two flat levels over a garage level. We thought it would be important to kind of touch on the site coverage, just as an interesting fact. This is the coverage that exists today, the existing hospital. And this is the coverage with our proposed plan. You've got a Google Earth aerial shot that just really shows a pretty large building. Some of the interesting facts as we try to design a building that's for sort of the next millennium. The building here, being a hospital, it really wasn't designed for the pedestrian. It happened to have about a 1/4 acre green space that was designed really just as a green space on a fairly steep slope, and it's not really for the public at all. It was just green space. And then the only other part of the site that's open is the back where the emergency room was, and it's just asphalt. So, so how we intend to address it is really, and we're not going to get into landscaping tonight, but the plan is obviously not to create a large green space. I mean, this is not where you'll want to have your touch football game, after you have your Thanksgiving dinner. But we want to create a true public space that will be something that Lakewood has always wanted. With the greenery of the site is not going to be done in one fell swoop. It's going to be done sporadically around the property. So wherever you are on the property, you will experience some different levels of greenery and softness. We think that's the most effective way to buffer a mixed-use development such as this. We did some SketchUp renderings. We'll do more detailed renderings in the future as the design evolves, but I thought I'd just walk you through these. These 2 are aerial shots looking at the property. This upper one is looking at it from the north, directly at the plaza. And what you see from the air is you see the retail, which is sort of in red, Curtis Block here, retail in red as a podium. And then you see the office building sitting above that podium. That's the commercial zone. The middle zone, you see the parking deck, and you see how those liner units pretty effectively screen the 3 sides of that parking deck. And then in the back, you see the apartment building, and then as it transitions down to the stacked flats, the purpose of that is to really try to create a development that does not appear imposing. It's really scaled down to meet the perimeter massing. So it won't be overwhelming, from the street, and you'll see that when we get down to the eye level renderings. Conversely, the view of the property from the south, you see in front of you the stacked flats and how those will buffer the residential units to the south, and then the apartment building in the center, the parking deck with the liner units around 3 sides. Then to the north, you see the retail podium, and then the office building above that.
David, can I just interrupt you for
Please.
a second? Usually when a police officer walks in the room, we give them the right to say whatever they need to say, so. I'm sorry to interrupt. That's okay.
Hi, you going to take up my car?
No.
Oh, good.
Somebody left their car running in the parking lot, we're just making sure everything's okay, it's white mix on, registered to Lakewood pavement. Say the name one more time.
He's like, don't want to run out of gas. make sure I don't
All
run
right,
out of
sorry
gas.
about that, David. Just-
No, it's perfectly fine.
It was in your car, so.
It wasn't my, I did check, though. The next few views are from the eye level. So again, starting on Detroit Avenue, what you see is the Curtis Block Building, and then the retail podium that's starting to develop behind that, the office tower above that, and then you start to see the liner residential units as you look down Marlowe. This view down here is you're looking straight on in the plaza. And again, the plaza is not going to look like that when we're done. It's going to be a beautifully articulated space. But you do see the retail podium and the office building above that, and then the liner units along Bell. More eye level. You see you're on Bell, and you're right at the vehicular access point. So this is the part of the parking deck that you will see from either Bell or from Marlowe, just that little corridor. And then very quickly, you'll start to pick up the residential liner units. These are single-loaded residential units, essentially like a bolt-on. Might be another way to consider it as like a bolt-on residential that would cover up the parking deck. Looking a little further away on Bell, you see what we call the stacked flats. You see the residential building beyond, and you see the liner units in front of you with the office beyond that. This view, again, a little bit closer up. This view is important because, and I haven't touched on this yet, in the private zone, this is where, if you lived here, you would drive in here, and you could have a choice when you get to this point to either turn to the left to go into the parking deck to a designated space that would be yours, or turn to the right where you would drive around. And I'm going to back up and show you. What I was saying is, you would, from that view, you're pulling in here, and you have a choice to either turn to the left to go into the parking deck to your designated space. You could turn to the right, because we have a drive lane that would go around the residential neighborhood and then back out. Well, why did we do that? We did that because we didn't feel that a cut-through in the residential neighborhood was appropriate. We felt a more private environment was the way to go to really make that a special place to live. The next four, or the last four, because I'm trying to be brief here, are what we call some conglomerate, some combination views. And at the bottom, you have a portion of the plan. There's a section cut through this part of the project. The section itself occurs here, and it's in direct alignment with the plan. So you can look up and down and compare, well, how tall is this building? How tall is the parking deck? How tall is the retail? And you can see, and also, while you're looking at this, think of how the site is sloping from 0 to 24. So all those uses are being layered but integrated together with a slowly rising site as you go from north to south. One interesting other fact is the height of the apartment building and the height of the office building look pretty much the same height. That's true. We're proposing a 9-story apartment here, but as you notice, the floor-to-floor on apartments are much less than the floor-to-floor on an office building. You know, the floor-to-floor on the residential would probably be 10 to 11 feet. The office would be more like 15 feet, and the retail would be even larger than that, depending on the type of tenant that we wind up getting in there. Connecting the commercial building with the deck, we're proposing a bridge. Why? Because maybe some of the second floor tenants would want direct access from the garage at their level, and some of the office tenants may want direct access from their level into the garage. This view is looking the other direction on the site. So what you see is the retail. You can see the retail. You see Detroit Avenue here. You see the office building above that, the parking deck, and then the residential building beyond. Again, this element here, which it's sort of hard to see because it was a section cut through the SketchUp model, and sometimes those get a little bit hard to read. But this is where the bridge would be, which you can see going across here. There's two transverse sections, in other words, sections cut through the short side of the property, this one being through the back of the apartment building, and you see how it reads. And the important thing here is the tallest part of the apartment is in the very center of the site. We felt that that was important to put it in the center of the site and then to step down as you get further out, and that's where you see these wings, these little wing elements that will come off that center part of the building that would be at a lower height. So you're effectively stepping down from here to here to here down to grade. And the last view is a section cut through the garage, and I know garages, it's a pretty intense view there because you're seeing the ramps of the garage in section, but the point of this view is to see the clinic building on your left, and you start to see the liner buildings that are buffering the parking deck from Bell and Marlowe. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
So, Mr. Chair, we have one more quick thing to get through. I'd actually like to turn it over to Mike Malinsky and then over to the commission to talk through some questions, feedback that you guys have at this point.
Then public comment.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mike?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, so, I'm here to talk a little bit tonight just about, where the project's at this point and kind of what the expectations are going forwards in some ways. Thanks. See if I can operate this thing. So, we talked about, again, the development objectives being kind of the, one of the original documents for this project, something that's going to be a go-by as we go throughout the process. One thing about those is that those even can be distilled down a little bit as we move forward. There's 6 to 7 of those that really kind of are going to start to touch on how this project physically manifests itself on the site. So, and I think that's important to kind of realize or think about in a lot of ways is that, as David went through, is that there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen on this project. This is a very big, very complicated project. And as someone who's been involved in projects of this scale before, you very quickly realize that it's important to kind of come up with these first principles and to kind of come up with a shorter list of things to look at and do and to focus on. So that's why, I want to talk a little bit about, like, as we kind of move forward throughout the design process, is what is going to be focused on specifically. I think George, did a great job of kind of talking about the fact that when they responded to the RFQ, they responded with a vision for what they thought the project could be, and made an excellent response to those development objectives as they were laid out in the RFQ. But in some ways, that ends up being a vision in a vacuum. From this point forward, we want to start getting kind of the community's input on a very serious level in terms of how the project comes together and manifests itself on the site. So the first thing to talk about is just how those proposed uses that are going to happen on the site, how those complement uses that are already in our city, how those uses integrate with the neighborhood that's around this site, when those uses, certain aspects of those uses need to be mitigated versus the residential use nearby. Those are kind of important considerations that we're going to get into as the design develops more. Having this site as a very much a microcosm of what most of Lakewood is in terms of a transition zone between our commercial spine along Detroit Avenue back to our residential neighborhood makes it a very interesting problem to solve for the designers. And David also touched on too, the vertical change and elevation of the site as well is going to be an interesting problem to solve as we go through. It'll offer opportunities as the project design progresses. So, scale and space, again, that's a lot about how this project, its size, kind of touches on neighborhoods. David mentioned some about having that large apartment building, tucked into the middle of the site and flanked by smaller units on either side. That's a great approach to kind of start talking about, again, how we transition down to the single-family residential zones around this. So, for surfaces, as an architect, this is where, for me, we really get into the kind of the meat of the design problem. Those surfaces, and we're going to talk a lot about these, as we go through ABR. But there's certain rhythms that happen along streetscapes. There's a certain rhythm of the houses along Marlowe and Bell that happens along our commercial core. That happens when you walk along a sidewalk or even drive by in a car. So those are things that we'll want to explore as the design develops for this project and really kind of make unique to the site and to Lakewood. With textures too, it's a very similar kind of problem, is to make those things visually interesting, for pedestrians going by, and using changes in planes to make some interesting things happen with the site. So then the public space. I mean, the public space is really, for me, it's going to be a point of pride for the entire city for the next century. This is going to be a space that is really something that Lakewood hasn't had in its first century, and it will for its next, and that's going to be something great. Lakewood, as a city of homes, is some place that we really pride ourselves in our front porches, on many of the houses here in town, right? We've got this interstitial zone between the public realm of the street and the private realm of our own houses that makes Lakewood houses really something unique. Well, this becomes a front porch for the entire city in a lot of ways. This becomes the place where we can gather with neighbors and friends and have events and do things like that that are really going to be beneficial to the city. We've started to just talk a little bit about doing scenario planning for that public space. And by scenario planning, what I mean is to talk about, well, what events are going to happen there? What is it like when we have the tree ceremony, in the wintertime, the lighting of the tree ceremony happen there, or, a farmer's market in the summertime. Those big events will happen, but it'll also be times when someone's sitting out there and having lunch on a sunny day in the summer. So those different events that space will have to support all those different kind of uses as they happen. And we're going to start looking at those real hard. So other than that, the character of the space will be really important, and it's something that we're going to get into a lot. So again, just taking the design, and it's a lot to look at all at once, and I got a lot to take in. But focusing on a couple of discrete elements usually will help us really develop what the space comes down to. And that kind of constructive feedback is what's going to make this project a success for the entire community. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And again, as we've said before, our primary discussion tonight is on really the first one on this list of 4, and that future discussions, not even at this board, but at other boards and other meetings, we'll talk about some of the other issues too. So we're ready for public comment, right? So,
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if you want to open it up for dialogue with the commission first, or take public comment first, that's completely up to you.
okay. Do you guys want any questions now? You want to wait until?
I've got a couple questions or comments. I took a few notes.
We'll ask a few questions now.
First 2 comments. First, this plan development process with the city as a partner is, I think, the perfect vehicle to get the public input and get the project that we want. Our experience with the McKinley School development, where the question of massing and transition was handled through that, I think makes this the exact right process, because you get particulars when you get down to a final agreement. And starting with building blocks, I think, is an excellent approach. The site layout being 8 feet going from Marlowe to Bell and 24 feet drop that way, I think brings up something that's very important. This site, on old maps of Lakewood, there was a creek that ran down Bell. And you can see which way the water is running. There was a reason for that. Stormwater in this location and along Detroit is just a critical issue for the city and every development that we're going to have, and managing that. So being creative in how we manage and overmanage, if you will, beyond even what a code would require on this site is really important. The old hospital building grew organically and stormwater was not managed. It was just shed and not managed in any way. So there's an opportunity here by starting fresh to put a 21st century development that meets the objective goals, meets the goals of the community vision to have sustainable management of water. This is a great opportunity. And I'm not suggesting that it be all grass and green, but just very, very high value placed on managing as much stormwater as we can to keep it out of the system that otherwise is also going to need other upgrades. So just make that a word of consideration. The question that I had, just briefly, is on liner units. You mentioned dedicated parking space. I don't know if it's determined at this point, but just curious if the liner units have direct access into their parking space in the garage, like you can go out your back door into a covered parking space or not, or that's too much of a detail at this point. Just crossed my mind.
Yeah, David,
Yeah, I think come up here.
David, come back up
That's
to the
fine.
podium.
And that's enough for now. I just posed the question, maybe we can take all the questions together.
Yeah, I think I'd rather
Let's do that.
assemble the questions and then,
Okay.
instead of running back and forth.
Correct.
Thank you.
That's all I had. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Some of the things, and I echo Lou's comments about stormwater. I'm curious about some of the bike or pedestrian infrastructure on the site. How Lakewood's not only a community of cars, and I think certainly to support the office portion and retail portion of the site, you're going to need the parking. It's over the code for the parking amount. I wonder if there's creative ways to use portions of the deck in other ways, especially on the top levels. I know there was discussion of an amenity deck in some of the earlier kind of visioning of this site. I don't know if that's sounds like something that's not being considered at this point. And the pedestrian bridge seems to have two levels. Does one serve the office and one serve the retail portion? I'm just curious. Or is that just a massing error that showed up in one of the side sections? And then the alleyway through the site, I'm curious if that's a dedicated right-of-way or is that more of a private drive? It looks like some snow removal may be an issue. How is it going to be speed bumped? I'm just thinking about people, even though it's not a cut-through, people sometimes still use things as a cut-through. The traffic in this neighborhood is pretty intense, and how it seems like you're trying to keep the residential parking on the south of the site and the commercial parking on the north, but how is that going to work with where 90 is located and where people might be coming from? I'm just curious as to how that could be handled, on site when this development is up and running.
You had a few of my questions on your list, so a few of my questions are, can you explain the winter garden concept? I'm just curious about what that is. Also, how much green space is currently on the plans? Because I saw that the plans just show how much space is covered by buildings. Another question I had was, where do you think that ADA parking will be located? And I want to echo Lou's comments about the reserved parking, and I wanted to ask the city, are those parking spots included in the total count of parking spaces, or because they're reserved, are they not included? So. Also, I wanted to know if any of the residential units have attached garages. And that is it.
I have a very strange request out of left field, and that is I would be very interested to know what the estimated daytime and estimated nighttime population of the site is. And I think with some square footage and some estimate, it has to be an estimate at this point, but how many units and how, 1 point whatever per unit, and then what retail and what office would yield. And then I think that would give us another idea of scale and use and traffic. And so I don't know if that's something we'll hear about tonight, but at some point I think it'd be really interesting to talk about how many folks are on the site during the day and how many are at night. And then I was also just on the residential side, I know it might also be too early, but is there a breakdown between for sale units and rental units? And again, that might be a function of a future pro forma, but I think that would be a question that some people might also have, so. That was it. Anything else that you got?
I thought of a few other things.
Okay, oh, good.
One, where will, I know it might be too early, but where will the refuse collection take place on the site for the residences? And I know I had another one, but okay, come back to me.
It's a good start. And again, as we go to public comment, what I would hope to do is that we would ask folks to come up and give their name, sign in, make their comment, ask their questions, and instead of a dialogue back and forth that will delay everything, these guys are taking detailed notes, and what we'll do at the end is we'll ask the applicant come up, answer as many as they can answer tonight, or some of these are going to have to be answered in the future at future meetings, and we'll make sure we document that. And that way we keep away from having too many back and forth conversations and people running back and forth to the podium. So I think that'll be a more cleaner way to do it for this evening. So,
Mr. Chair,
yes.
just an observation in the years, that we have 2 written comments that have been submitted, and for many years now, it's been very valuable to have things written. That we have 3-minute time limit, and we have a number of people, but we do read the comments that we get. They're part of the record. We consider them. The sooner they're in, the better. We can consider them more fully. So I also want to encourage people to make written comments by whatever mechanism the city has up, but that the commission itself has always given high value to written comments.
Great point. Thank you. So with that, again, you guys are going to be running the timer, so we're going to try to be a little bit organized about the time, so be efficient. So whoever is ready first with public comment, come on forward and sign in, give us your name, and let us know what's on your mind.
Hi, my name is Kelly Drum. I live on Bell, but I'm north of Detroit before the tracks. And there's a beautiful parking garage across the street from my house. And I'm actually hoping that maybe long-term, that this garage might replace that garage. Because the one that's still there was, I think, the same age as the one that was torn down, it was determined it was, aging and needed to come down. But the other one's been left. So I don't know what the plan is with, I know we're gonna need more parking, but if they're gonna address that at all, because it does seem to be crumbling a bit. And then my other question is noise for this area where the plaza is, how kind of that is going to be handled, because it does carry down Bell, especially with the 2 buildings that are there. It all echoes off of those buildings. So how they're going to address the sound issue. And somebody brought up about the top of the parking garage and it being for other use, that at some previous plan was for that. Is there any plan or consideration for making that a green space and because you're going to have all these residential units who will probably have children like I do, and there's no park here, there's no green space for the children, and would that be something that they would consider? And some sort of green space or some sort of playground or something of that nature, even a splash pad, but to use the top of the parking garage. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Robin Lagorn, and I live on Marlowe, right across the street from the emergency room. We have several concerns. When we first started this project and having meetings, they told us the houses that would be built would be similar to the houses that are there. But now I hear you're going to have 3-story houses with garages on the bottom. None of our houses look like that. What happened to having the front porches and having the house looking similar to ours instead of us looking at garages? And then the other thing we were concerned with was who's going to own them and who's going to rent them. You know, how many, but you brought that up also. And then our other issue was the snow removal. When Lakewood Hospital was working, the snow they removed from their property went on our tree lawns. We didn't appreciate it. So what's going to happen here with this snow removal? Because where are they going to put the snow? Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much. It's hard to take notes and run the timer, right?
Is it up already? I had submitted a number of questions, but a new one came up to my mind while I was listening to the proposal, and it has to do with the entrance to the facility. It sounded like there was only going to be one entrance to the proposed development. And did I understand that correctly?
You're talking about for vehicles to enter the
Yes.
site? Okay.
Yes.
We'll answer that one.
And if that is the case, I have a concern because even as the situation is now, traffic backs up on Bell to the light on Franklin. So with only one driveway for access to the development, whichever side of the development that happens to be, that traffic is going to back up. I mean, you're talking about a lot of people driving in and out of the development. So I would like to see that addressed if possible. And I also had questions about the green space, and I know that will be for future discussion, but I was wondering if it was going to be more of a plaza where people could have multi-use and multi-activity things happening. But the traffic flow is really, really one of my main concerns after hearing about the design.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, yeah, ma'am, you said you gave us some written comments, right? So did you say your name as well, or?
I submitted 12 written comments.
Okay,
And my name is Donna Hoder.
Donna, okay.
And
Thank
rather
you
than
very
read
much.
them all, I know that the commission already has
Got
them.
Yep, we did.
And I know they'll be addressed.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name's Jesse Shedden. I'm actually on Marlowe in the house right next to what would be the new walk-up units. So my main two concerns really are looking at the alleyway and the fact that we'll have cars not only along the side of the driveway and the back part of the property on both those two houses, but also parts of the house itself. And, you know, traffic, headlights, things like that, directly into backyards, back doors. The other, you know, concern really is the overall height of the structure itself, not only the townhouses next to the residential homes that are already, but the apartment building, because that's not that far away. So that's a big concern as far as the commercial and the apartment building height.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening. My name is Joe Betts. My wife and I and two kids live on Marlowe, right across from the proposed parking garage. My first question is about the setback distance on the single residential units. We just were curious how far that would be, if there'd be any green space, tree lawns of any sort on Bell and Marlowe. That would maybe address one concern of trying to make it feel a little more residential as opposed to just concrete and the units. We're curious about demolition on a project this size is going to be big. We're curious about dates, when that would start, the hours of work. We had something with the hospital where they were out working at like 3 in the morning. We had to call actually the Lakewood police to talk to them. Will you work on Saturdays? Will you demo on Saturdays? What are you going to do about street flow? Will Marlowe and or Bell become one-way streets for upwards of 4 or 5 years? When it's all said and done, will there be any parking available on the street on Marlowe and Bell? Lighting and hours, I don't know if that's an appropriate time to address that question, but how much light are we going to have? Is my toddler going to be woken up at night? And is someone going to come over and watch him if he is? On the term sheets that you gave to all of us in the city of Lakewood, two particular questions. You mentioned unit numbers, a minimum of 140, but the public notice we just received said 200. So I'm just curious when those 60 additional units were decided. I know the minimum was 140, but it went up. For office retail square footage, you mentioned on the term sheet 100,000 square foot. That's now up to 180,000 square foot on the public notice. Again, just curious when that went up and if that's still debatable. When were the two houses purchased or proposed to be purchased on Marlowe, and when were we all going to find out about that? And do you have a deadline for feedback dates, for feedback online? Like, is there a drop-dead deadline for submitting those comments? I think that's all for this time. Thanks.
Great. Very good. Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, my name's Sean Mott. I don't actually live near here, although I'm in Lakewood. It seems like, and this might be a slightly different take on the, it seems like the parking garage makes up a really big footprint, takes up a big footprint of this project. I was curious if there's any thought into doing things to promote less driving here. I mean, we're talking about the future of the city, and talking about younger people moving in here, younger than most people here. They're going to be the future residents. And if there's any ideas to integrate public transportation. I know we talked about some pedestrian.
That's not you. Go ahead. You keep forgetting to reset it.
Sorry. Other forms of transportation, to encourage other forms of transportation to this project outside of drive. I know parking's always a big concern in the city. I'm sure that, I mean, it seems like a little overkill. Anyway, the other thing is, again, talking about younger people moving to the city, anything with renewable energy, solar power, anything else to make it more green. You talk about the water runoff is a concern. That's always been a concern recently in the city, if there's anything being addressed for renewable energy, solar power, for example, on any of the homes or the commercial areas. So that's all.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, environmentally sustainable development practices is one of the objectives. So we'll get you some more detail on that. Okay.
My name's Matt Herberger. I live on Bunce Road. Just a couple of comments, and they probably echo some of the sentiments that have already been brought up, particularly what the gentleman brought up just previously. Even looking at the scale here and the number of spaces for the parking garage, it seems overkill, 800. And I know the gentleman here on my left mentioned that that's beyond what's in the code. It seems like there should be, I don't know the reason behind it. Are we compensating for other retail and commercial spaces that lack parking? We're trying to make up for it here, but I think it probably should be addressed because it seems to dominate the property. Cladding it with residential units is certainly something that's seems like an innovative solution, but I still think it dominates. Then to echo another individual, these homes that are proposed on the southern side of the southern end of the project, is there any consideration for true single-family homes as opposed to townhouse? I know there's limitations as far as space, what's economically viable, but to integrate back into the neighborhood, you talk about integrating from north to south, from commercial to residential, you would hope that there would be more of a transition. I know those projects down here on Detroit, they look more like a commercial project than a residential project, the townhomes down Rockport area. So I would think that there should be some consideration, at least into maybe making those more integrated into what the existing structures are. And then just even the southern border, how that's going to integrate into the rest of the neighborhood kind of is an open question, I think. Are you going to have a line of trees? Is there going to be lighting there? It seems to me that that's something that should be addressed. And then finally, just a concern, I would think, with traffic. I don't know that there's any way, particularly if you have 800 parking spaces and you assume that there's going to be 800 people parking there, the traffic on Bell and Marlow, I just don't want, I can't conceive of those streets being able to support that kind of traffic. I don't know that there's ways to mitigate it, but certainly it seems that that could be problematic going forward. So just a couple of comments I thought I would add to the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, hi. Thanks. I'm Peter Ketter. I live on Marlow. So just, my comments really are mainly just about use adjacency and scale adjacency, and that we're sensitive to that all the way around the project. I happen to live toward the north end of Marlow, and it's quite different than the north end of Bell. You've got about 500 feet of commercial frontage on Bell with 4-story buildings, but on Marlow, the residential starts immediately behind the commercial frontage on Detroit. And so I think a 6-story building with I wasn't even clear from what I saw, but 5 or 10 foot setback seems like a bit much across from single family homes. But I do think there's a lot, I appreciate the consideration being given to the project. I do support it, but I just want to be clear that there needs to be sensitivity all the way around and make sure that we're considering the different character of Marlow from Bell. Also, just a question on the retail frontage on Marlow and what that would be. Is that the back? It's just not clear to me how exactly that functions. I assume it fronts on the plaza, but then how would the Marlow side of that be addressed? Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Karen. I live on Bell Avenue. Hold on. Sorry. I noticed a lot of people here, I couldn't hear them. Am I talking loud enough?
We can hear you.
Okay. First concern is the design of this. Bryce has already told me that has been taken down. It was very scary and horrifying looking to me, like a Carnival cruise ship. It is not as promised in keeping with the architecture of and the feel of the city. Also, is it possible to save the hospital facade, even if that's internally? I know that's just a thing people have been discussing. Let's see, how many stories high is this going to be? Parking garage. If this is a public parking garage with 800 spaces, can I park there? Can I have members of my family park there when they visit? Is it open to the public? Accessible 24/7? Who are we trying to attract with this? Singles, families, couples, people who just want to live and eat and work in one environment in a bubble? What about underground parking? Has that been considered? Is that even possible to make it less unsightly? Green space on top, perhaps. I don't know how that's done, if that's safe. And who owns this property? Does the city of Lakewood own this once it is completed, or do they own this once it is completed? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Nicole Shedden. I had some questions mostly about the residential areas. I'm curious as to how the rent and/or the mortgages will compare to the surrounding areas. You know, we're talking about having apartments and smaller homes and larger homes, but I'm curious what that is expected to be and consequently what the impact will be on the surrounding areas, the property owners. So not only the townhomes, the apartments on the three-sided single families, but also how the rent compares in the retail and the business space across Lakewood. I know, you know, we have a considerable amount of empty retail space on Detroit at the moment, and what that comparison is. Will 200 families affect the capacity of Grant Elementary School? You know, in the heyday of Lakewood before the hospital, there weren't 200 families, you know, in that area. So how's that going to affect the school system? The other question is, although I don't plan to move there, are there noise quality considerations for the three-sided single-family residence? Living behind a parking garage doesn't appeal to me. I don't know of many people it would appeal to, so I'm just curious as to what will be taken care of with that. And then the last question is general noise for the southern audience, meaning the neighbors, based on the apartments and condos. I realize that most of the noise from the retail space will affect the people to the north, but the height of the apartment building will cause a pretty decent amount of noise change for the people living to the south when you're talking about the height comparison of that 9 stories or whatever, the 9 stories down to a regular sized Lakewood house. So those are my questions.
Thank you. I see no one else approaching. Times 2.
I'm back. This one, my name is Donna. This question isn't so much about the development. I'd like to go back to communicating the information to the Lakewood residents. And it's great that we have a website, and it's great that people can get their name on the email list. And I would suggest that it might be helpful if there was some way to disseminate that information to all residents. I know we all know that we can read the back of our water bill, and anything that's news, it's typically on the back of that water bill. There are a lot of people that never think to go to the websites or to submit their email address, but if that information is available to them, they will do it. And the other thing is information could be left in the library or posted in the library. I'm just a strong advocate of communicating in multivarious ways and not just through social media, just because there are a lot of people that just don't access it or they don't have time, but everybody goes to the library, there are places everybody goes, and everybody reads the back of their water bill. So just concerned. I'd like people to be involved, and the more people that know how to be involved, the better. Thank you.
Good idea. Thank you.
Put my name back down.
Okay, with that, I will close the public comment section, and I will thank each and every one of you for the civility and the politeness and the absolutely fantastic questions. I mean, we're sitting up here thinking, well, why didn't we think of that question? So that was extremely helpful to us, and it raised quite a few questions. I don't know how many pages of notes they wrote down. While that was happening, a couple of us had, I think, a couple other questions to add to the list. So, Monica, I know you had something else you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, so I have a question about the required parking. This is probably a question for the planning staff. So it shows on here that there are 785 spaces required, and that includes Cleveland Clinic parking. I guess what I want to know is, should that be included in the parking maximum, or parking minimum, I mean? Is the current parking at the Cleveland Clinic site, it was clearly approved. So do they need this parking to fulfill any requirements? And if not, that might change the number of spots that, you know, the commission wants to see on the plans. Just a few considerations. I was thinking as I was listening to the public give their comments, it might be helpful to have an Uber drop-off on the site somewhere. Also, maybe consider putting charging stations near some of those residential units. And that's all I have.
So now we get to ask the applicant to come back up to the podium and answer as many of these questions as we can, or put these questions off to a future meeting if they're appropriate. Some of them had to do with design that will be dealt with next week and other times. So, but I do think you have quite a list there that maybe some of them are quickly answered and some of them take a little bit more analysis. So,
You guys want to
is
come
Dave going to come up or
back up?
George?
And thank you truly for the input. It's enlightening for us, and we do appreciate it, all of you. Bryce, I don't know how well you were able to take notes. I was writing as fast
We'll
as
read
I
them
could.
to
No,
you.
we'll read them to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want to offend anybody because maybe I missed something.
We'll read them to you, and then
And certainly, if, you know, I will look to your guidance on some of these things because I think it's kind of a combined response. So I would welcome whatever input you have in that regard. And obviously, I'd be remiss not to get RDL and David Parrish involved with some of the answers I think that are going to be required with respect to the design. So having said that, I'm all ears. We can start with maybe the Planning Commission first, or
yeah,
how
so
would
the
you-
Planning Commission questions, the first question was, how do you access the liner units along the garage?
David started, I think, to bring up the fact that, again, we're in the very, very preliminary design phase. There is an opportunity, I believe, because they abut the garage for perhaps direct access, but I don't know, has that been really determined definitively? I don't think it has.
A lot of it has to do with the floor elevation of the garage versus the floor elevation of the residential unit and how those stack. And in certain places, the floors will align, and certain places there'll start to be a disparity because the floor-to-floor of one is different than the floor-to-floor of the other. So again, it's a work in process, but we will fully respond to that in the future.
I think it's important to point out that with the design that we currently have, there is, as there currently is, parking along Marlowe, parallel parking. Those aren't going to be lost. I believe that those would be retained and available for the liner units or for the public for that matter. So I just wanted to point that out. In addition, if, based on what you're talking about as far as the elevations and access to the parking garage is problematic directly, we are expecting that there's going to be certain vertical circulation areas that would deal with where they might have designated parking for their facility if it's in addition to what might be out front.
Thanks. Another question is, are there 2 levels to the pedestrian bridge or just one, and how do those work?
At this point, there could be 2, but it's not set in stone. It really depends on the requirements of the tenants.
Yeah, our original scheme and vision was that there were bridges at every level, because anytime you start bringing any kind of occupancy above the ground floor, there's always, depending on who the tenant is, a request that the parking be as close as possible to that tenant, especially when we're talking about the office tenants and a second floor retail tenant. If we end up with, let's say, a fitness center on the second floor they want to have direct access to that rather than, or, for example, any type of tenant on the second floor. Unfortunately, second floor retail is very difficult to try and market. So we try to provide easy access at every level, but most importantly, it's also a function of the office tenant, which is 4 floors above that. So it's likely there's going to be probably two levels of the bridge.
Is the alley dedicated right-of-way, or is that expected to be private?
My question would be, which alley are we talking about?
I
Is
believe
it
the
this one here?
service, yes.
East-west one.
I don't think that's been adequately discussed, but we're open to whatever that could evolve to be.
So we'll answer that in the future.
Yeah, I think that's something we would address as we progress.
Can,
George, would you do me a favor? I know it might make noise, but can you pull that microphone up just a little bit?
I know it's going to make noise,
I know,
so bear
but-
with me when I do that.
I think we'll hear you a little better. Okay,
There
thanks.
you go. Is that better? Okay, sorry about that.
can you explain the winter garden concept?
There, now we're talking. Can I take a shot at that? Yeah. Go, please, take your.
Testing. The winter garden, people say, oh, what's a winter garden? Well, when you look at the word winter garden, what do you think it means? To me, when I first saw the word winter garden, it connoted a feeling of warmth, maybe a gathering place, a place that's fun to be in. So it's sort of a descriptive word of a circulation lobby. In this case, it would serve multiple purposes. It would serve as circulation into the building plaza, or circulation into the building from the drop-off or the vehicular, I don't want to use the word alley because it's going to be nicer than an alley. So I don't want to start with that one. Within that winter garden, there will be vertical circulation, be it an escalator, be it an elevator, or multiple escalators and elevators to go to the various levels that one needs to go to. It's also going to service outdoor patio space for the restaurants. When let's say the weather's bad outside, you could still be in a patio, an indoor patio in the winter garden, and it would be a warm, well-lit, warm, fun space to be in. And since we all love to live in Cleveland here, we all know the wonders of four-season living, and we want to really design this as a four-season center. And that's what the winter garden is. It's that four-season room. Sorry, that's a long answer.
It also is acting as and I'll emphasize a little bit further, a spine for the vertical as well as the horizontal circulation between the various components of the project. There's going to be a major elevator lobby here that is going to be servicing the corporate tenants above. There needs to be a strong identity associated with that. Those are clearly requirements that an office tenant is going to be looking for so that they can identify their access and they can identify their brand. So there's a lot going on here that really hasn't been designed yet, but the idea is that it acts as this central spine that connects all the various components, the outdoor plaza, the connection to the parking garage and to the residential behind it, the vertical circulation to the upper floors for the retail, and most primarily the identity associated with the office, the lobby that might have a concierge or something of that nature to help direct people to the corporate tenants.
There were a few questions on the residential garages. If they had attached garages, I think we're referring to the yellow walk-ups in the back. And then also, there was a concern from a resident about looking at garages. Can you explain a little bit of that design for those units?
You would not see the garage from Marlowe or from Bell. You would see a front porch. You would walk in and go upstairs or go straight into, maybe you go up to a stoop and go into the first floor flat and then walk up a stairway to get into the second floor flat. But those would be Lakewood porches, not garages. That's why we put the garages in the back off of the alleyway.
Yeah, exactly. The alleyway is to the backside, so everything's interior to the space.
Yeah, we really thought about not wanting to have the residents on the other side of the street subjected to headlights and that sort of thing. So that's why we designed it this way. So it's much more internally, keeping the vehicles internal to that, and it wouldn't, necessarily come out to the outside.
Do you have an estimate of daytime versus nighttime population on the site to get an idea of scale of uses? Or is that to come?
We're definitely going to need, that's a question that will evolve as we understand exactly who our tenants are.
At this point, do you have any idea of breakdown of rental versus for sale units?
We don't have a breakdown, but we certainly have a quota that we're required to meet, a minimum quota that is associated with for sale versus rental properties. And so there will be a hybrid of that. This is not this is not an all rental property residential development. This is there's going to be a number of fee ownerships as well.
There were a few questions about the parking garage and how the upper level would be used. Is there flexibility in that? Is there any thought of adding green space on top of the parking garage?
I know that David, by the way, there is a lot of thought and a lot of concern and consideration for green space. We're very sensitive to that. We understand the need for that. We understand how that can be an amenity. That was something that we originally and had always thought of and conceived. As this particular design evolves, we intend to incorporate that. There was some discussion about it being up on the upper deck, and we think that actually there may even be a separate or distinct VIP entrance, if you will, that might have for the upper condos or for the upper suites on the top floor access that could easily be identified from the upper deck, but also integrate for those residences a green space, and it could be on the rooftop of the buildings themselves. So we are exploring that.
There have been a few questions on traffic, people going to I-90 from this site, concerns about the entrances to the site and traffic backing up past intersections. These will be addressed in the traffic impact analysis, which is to come. So that information will be fully studied before a final decision is made.
Caitlin, I think one specific question, if I might, was about how many access points there were to the site, and there's more than one.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
I think that's
Actually, we're keenly aware and sensitive to how to mitigate traffic on the public thoroughfares. One of the ways that you do that is to try and get it off as quickly as you possibly can. By the same token, having more curb cuts may actually work in reverse. You need to have controlled access where you can identify the areas where traffic comes off, is siphoned off as quickly as possible, and then dispersed in intermittent areas. And that's why we've actually identified there are 4 access points to this property, and that is, we think, what is required in order to address the commercial and the residential components. And as David had identified before, there are 4 access points for the garage as well. And those access points occur virtually on-site versus off-site because, again, we think that would pose more traffic concerns. And again, we'll be addressing this in our traffic impact study, as Caitlin indicated. So we'll get confirmation of that philosophy and see whether that's appropriate, but that's our belief right now.
There was a question about refuse collection. I know we have a few truck service areas that are delineated. Has there been any thought for refuse collection?
No, we've just been sort of flying at 30,000 feet, but as we descend, we will definitely, I think there was also one about ADA as well, but we'll absolutely meet the ADA. We'll absolutely provide for adequate refuse removal and all those details that are very good.
There was a question about the alleyway and concern about headlights into houses and backyards along Bell and Marlowe. Can you talk about any design considerations for those?
I think that was especially on the southern boundary, if I'm not
Correct.
mistaken.
The southern boundary, are we talking?
Into backyards.
Are we talking about here? Or we're talking here?
Back here, yeah.
Or here? Well, this, Yeah, again, there are no garages, and there's no opportunity for any kind of lighting of any sort to permeate or to trespass out across Marlow with this current concept anyways. The only exit and entrance would be right here. Here and here. This is Marlow here. May I clarify the question? Sure.
We're mostly concerned about the two houses on the southern end, the far left of the drawing.
The two houses
Backyard.
right there? And over here. Okay, and so the concern, if I hear you, is how would there be traffic, or would there be lights or headlights that would interfere? I see. You're talking about traffic coming down this way. I see what you're saying. This alley, this drive, this interior drive. Yeah. Yeah, we would definitely be proposing a buffer if that was an issue. That's not. I think that's a very.
thought about
I didn't
fence.
understand exactly what you were referring to, so I thank you for that.
I just want to make sure that we're getting everything on the record. So the clarifications we may not be picking up, but the question was just clarifying the southern edge and light emitting into the two backyards.
Understood. It would
Specifically,
be,
the first house
these-
is fronting on Bell and Marlow.
These interior drives as you're heading
Right.
southbound.
Right, and the answer is leading to some kind of a treatment of that southern edge with either,
If you could speak into the microphone, please.
we're still missing.
If you could,
Landscaping.
it'll be on the record if you speak into the microphone.
Thank you.
All right. So that's a design feature then that is still to be determined, that, how that
Yes.
southern boundary is
Yes,
treated?
yes.
Okay.
But it's duly noted and well taken.
Can you explain the setback distance of the residential units? Are there going to be tree lawns and some landscaping in front?
I'll let you take that.
Oh, thanks. No, the streetscape, we believe, like I addressed in my presentation, where we're not planning to have a large, big lawn type of an element, but we do intend to introduce landscaping all around the property. We will have landscaping along, let me borrow the PowerPointer, along Bell and Marlow, along with, and integrated with the porches. It won't just be a stoop and nothing else. We really want to create something like Mike mentioned, Lakewood is the city of homes and the city of porches, and we paid a lot of attention to that in the project we designed a couple years ago, McKinley Place. So we will address that.
There was a question about demolition dates and the hours of work. The demolition dates have not been set yet, but they are expected to start this winter. The abatement will start this fall, and that will be handled by a qualified abatement contractor. Hours of work, there are set hours of work that the city allows. Mark, you might know more specifically what those are.
Yes, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., Monday through Saturday. No work on Sundays or holidays.
So, Mr. Chair, I can weigh in. Joe, thanks for all those the comments earlier related to, I'd call them construction related to abatement and demolition. Just to set the expectations straight, the city will be reaching out to the immediate neighborhood around the site to schedule a specific construction activity meeting so that we can talk to you about all of those expectations. So you can plan to hear from my department about that. We'll be scheduling that meeting soon. Hopefully tonight we can answer some of those short questions, but we'll also be scheduling that meeting and walking you through the entire construction schedule.
There was also a question on lighting, which is another study that will be done as part of this project. So a photometric study will be done to make sure it's not intruding on the residential properties. There was a question on the minimums in the term sheet that were provided, so the numbers that were originally seen versus the square footages and number of units that are currently proposed.
To my knowledge, the minimums were just that. There are always minimums, and areas that we're talking about now have remained pretty much the same. Is that, do you concur, Bryce?
Yeah, I think the numbers that are in the plan are actually what was originally proposed from Carnegie's plans in its response to the request for proposals. The city worked very hard with the developer to establish minimum thresholds so that we could ensure that it would be a mixed-use development. We didn't want to just land on the maximums. We wanted to create a floor to ensure that we had mix of uses across the entire site.
And there were 2 homes purchased on Marlowe. Can you explain when that occurred and that process?
That's fairly recent. We have put those under contract here in the last, I think, 30 days. I can't recall the exact date, but they're subject to our review and due diligence investigations, and obviously this project moving forward.
There was also a question of deadline for comments. There wouldn't be a deadline for any comments. If you get them in before the meeting, we'll get them to Planning Commission. And if you get them in after, we will wait till the next month of Planning Commission. So as soon as you can send in your comments via email or dropping them off at City Hall, we will accept them. There is a question on, has there been thought to promote less driving on the site and the scale of the parking on the site?
Actually, that is a fundamental consideration. We've been all along trying to address that concern. We felt that it was very important, and I think David Pierce tried to pick up on it and part of his graphic, the pedestrian pathways and the integration between the various uses of the project. And we want to make it as pedestrian friendly as possible, as bike friendly as possible. We intend to have various bike stations that are associated with it. Integrating public transportation has always been a big and a huge concern of ours. We've noted the proximity of bus locations and various other types of transit. We actually market the fact that it's very close to the 117th station. So we're very, very concerned about that, and we want to try and promote that as much as possible. And I think you'll see that as the design evolves.
There is a question on whether or not you considered homes on the southern side of the site. Have you considered true single-family homes in this area?
This is a function of really what we think the market would bear and how it would work in our pro forma, but at the end of the day, we're not adverse to single family. As we mentioned, we do believe that in some ways there could be that option. How many is really not, we're not in a position really to address.
There's a question on treating Bell different from the Marlowe side due to the single-family homes starting immediately after the commercial area on Marlowe. Specifically, the retail, whether or not that would be kind of the back end of the retail, and 6 stories, the height of the building with little setback. So can you address some of the considerations on the Bell side versus the Marlowe side, which has more single-family homes closer to the commercial area?
So I think we're talking about this area right here. Is that?
That's correct.
Is this the area?
That's my understanding.
Is this the area we're concerned about? Yeah.
Yeah, the first few houses on Marlowe past
Right.
Detroit that face that retail
Which I
paint
think
block.
starts about right here, am I right? Or somewhere in here? It looks like that's the first curb cut. That's, you know, what we should do is we should probably zoom out on our next drawing to understand a little bit, have a better flavor for this immediate surroundings, exactly what's going on, maybe get a little clearer picture. But your concern is well taken, and I think what this would ultimately end up doing is we would probably try and address that with the way we would handle the massing of the building, the textures of the building. I don't think that this is, and the setbacks that we've got here, are those the same as what is currently there now?
It's right there.
Okay. So we'll, What's that? Yeah, what I think what he's saying is that currently that is the current line of the building footprints that exist there now. Just to give you an exact idea of what the relationship is. So we can look at that. We can take, I think, a better look at how we can address that and make it more sensitive to the surrounding scale and texture and massing that is across the street.
There's a question on whether or not you have considered or are able to save the hospital facade.
I guess, is that something the city is capable of doing?
Yeah, it's a good question, Karen. Thanks for that. I would say that the two primary concerns with that is, the first is that if the facade were saved, we would not be able to deliver on the minimum development requirement of a half-acre community gathering space in the front, because that facade actually sits in front of the proposed elevation that you're seeing here. So it would challenge us. In fact, we couldn't deliver the half-acre requirement as established in the development agreement. So that's a practical issue. The second is just the structural integrity of that wall and maintaining it to deliver anything close to what's being proposed tonight. So as opposed to that, we've talked a lot about the importance of the Curtis Block building at the corner of Marlowe, serving as the building's historical marker and being integrated into its design. So we're really going to leverage that building to speak through the historical character of the city in this project.
I'd like to add, Bryce, I think part of the development objectives, made it clear that historical significance of the site was important. And so in our vision and in our proposal that we had come up with, we tried to incorporate design elements that reflected some of the character of the hospital. We had suggested introducing a colonnade that kind of framed out the corner of Detroit and a bell in a design, a colonnade, if you will, that was reminiscent of the curvature of the building of the hospital that exists there. In addition, we talked about taking bricks and portions of it and maybe identifying them as maybe part of some kind of the pavers that might be used at the site. So there are some ways that we have tried to utilize some of the character and some of the elements of the hospital, but the actual facade itself, as Bryce mentioned, would be very problematic.
There was a question on clarifying the number of stories of the buildings. If you could just point that out really quick on the number of stories.
Along Detroit, again, we're proposing a 6-story building. There'll be 2 levels of retail and then 4 levels of office. And that's just as far as a mass. How that mass is articulated, how the edges are treated, and that sort of thing, that's still to be determined. The apartment building, we're proposing a 9-story apartment building. And again, the heights.
That's just the center portion.
That would be just the center portion. Thank you, George. If you recall, the wings, these elements on the side would start to step down. So the tallest part of the building would be in the very center of the site, and it would step down as you went to the left or to the right. And then the stacked flats would be a 3-level.
Thank you.
And then, sorry, Caitlin,
Yep.
while we're on this slide, another question had to do with subterranean parking. And this, to me, shows that there are 2 levels below ground, or is that not what I'm seeing?
That's correct. And
Okay.
part of that is just a function of, as David has indicated, the topography of the site. I mean, there's no way to not do it that way. So yes, a portion of the garage is underground, and that helps minimize some of its height and mass at the street level.
For the garage, would this be a public garage? Would this be open to families? Is it 24/7? Has that been decided yet?
Well, it has to some extent. We have to provide parking for our office tenants, and we need to provide parking for the retail and the residential component. We intend to compartmentalize that, but by the same token, without excluding the public. There will be a significant portion of the project that is dedicated to public use. In fact, we have got that as part of our obligation to the city, and those will be available at all times. In addition to that, I think there was mention about the Cleveland Clinic. We're trying to incorporate that obligation, what the city has, to provide those parking spaces to them. So that's also a part of the parking requirement that this garage services.
And on that topic, to Monica's question about the clinic, as a part of the master agreement that the city entered into with Lakewood Hospital Association and the Cleveland Clinic, one small part of that was that 75 spaces needed to be maintained on this site for the Cleveland Clinic. So it needs to be maintained either during construction or replaced during construction. And then it needs to be maintained after the site is redeveloped. So it's a lot of words. It is complicated, but the simple deliverable is there are 75 spaces that are allocated to the site for the clinic that have to be included in the project.
Yeah, and just one further point. The public parking, retail parking is for all practical purposes the public parking. There's no way that we can really provide or distinguish between the public and the private. So I just want to emphasize that there's a good portion of that garage that would be dedicated to that.
There's a question on what market sector are you trying to attract? So who are you trying to attract with these units?
Residential.
Well, we...
Residential, yes.
For the residential component, yeah. I mean, we see the millennials, we see families, we see young professionals, we see empty nesters, certainly. I mean, we see basically what we believe is a great opportunity to provide the stock that we think this project really is gearing itself towards with the corporate office tenant and the type of retailer and the mixed uses that we intend to bring. So we think it's a great opportunity.
The next is a question on who owns the property, which it is currently owned by the city of Lakewood, and it would be transferred to Carnegie Management. There's a question on how will the rent or mortgages fit into the surrounding neighborhood?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that. We have a prediction of what we think our rental rates will be, and we have an understanding or an idea of what we think we would sell our fee ownership to be. What the mortgage rate is under a circumstance such as that, I think is subject to the individual financing that would be associated with it. We think that the rental rates are very competitive, but yet because this is going to be more of an upscale product, we want to be sure that we're bringing in the right people that are renting those properties, and we feel that the types of target rents that we're going for will ensure that. And similarly, the type of quality housing stock for fee ownership, we think, would do the same. And in fact, I think it does nothing but improve the values of the surrounding residential properties. Average. No, well, actually, we have objectives, but it's really a function of the type of tenant. A smaller tenant's going to pay more. A larger tenant's going to probably pay less. And if it's an anchor tenant that we are really going after, we'll probably give them a bargain rate so that we can get somebody going, so that we can create a synergy for the rest of the leasing effort. So it's a hard answer at this juncture to give you, but we do have an idea of where we ultimately want to end up in order to make the project successful.
Thanks. So I don't know if we can answer this question at this point, but if there's any consideration to the capacity of Grant Elementary?
Yeah, Nicole, that was a great question. We'll put that on our to-do list. We'll reach out to our colleagues at the school board to ask that question.
There have been a few questions on noise, one for the public space and how noise might be controlled from the public space, and then also noise considerations for the residences adjacent to the garage, and then also noise from the apartments and condos to the neighbors to the south.
Which one you want to take? Yeah, sure. Certainly, I think the public plaza definitely would require further study. I think it's fair to say, though, that the liner units, if that's what we're talking about, up against the parking garage, are, not only by the type of construction, but by the character of its design, will not allow any kind of acoustic trespass.
Have you considered an Uber drop-off on the site?
Not yet, but I think it's a great idea.
Awesome, great idea.
Or any charging stations?
We have those contemplated. Those we got.
And then the other comment that we got was advertising in the water bill or posting in the library, which are both great ideas, so we will definitely take those into consideration. We're always looking for ways to reach more people, so it was a good comment. Anything else?
Yeah, another quick comment on the required parking question that came up a couple of times. Mr. Chair, one thing you can expect from certainly our team and the Carnegie team is to deliver the approach to parking. We didn't really deliver that to you tonight, so we'll start to answer why there are this many spaces, and then work together with you guys in the community on what's the appropriate level of parking. Very similar to the discussion we'll have shortly for this development. And of course, it's on a case-by-case basis on how we review those, but that's something you can expect in the future.
Great, thanks. And there's no short answer to the other parking garage question that we got on the.
There is, yeah. So the parking garage that Kelly brought up, I believe this is the garage behind Lakewood Center North, if I'm not mistaken. So that garage is privately held by a company called Times Equities. Times Equities is headquartered out of New York City. They privately own the garage. Practically, it parks employees at First Federal and the office employees that are in Lakewood Center West, and now the apartment dwellers that are in Lakewood Center North through its conversion. Totally understand some of Kelly's comments about the condition of it. Our building department has been very forward with that property owner about trying to make improvements at that property. To be clear, it's privately owned. It's not a part of this project. And at this point, I would plan for it to be staying there for quite some time.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Is the public plaza going to remain privately owned?
Yes. It will remain privately owned, and then there are protections in the development agreement that the developer and the city will sign that ensures that that space is used for public use. So it'll be privately owned public space. Question. Mr. Chair, I wanted to work through quickly. Donna submitted some questions in writing to the commission. I wanted to work through a few of these, if that's okay with you. Some of them have been answered, but I wanted to make sure to address these. The first question is, why was the information available utilizing social media exclusively? Why wasn't an effort made to ensure all Lakewood residents were made aware of the development plans? We addressed that slightly earlier with the public notices that will continue to go out. We'll continue to use the downtown development website. We'll continue to use social media. Donna also brought up some other examples that we'll explore as well, which is the water bill and posting to the library. I will reiterate that I do believe that the best way for people to stay engaged is to make sure you sign up on our website and you'll get email updates with meetings. Number two, who owns the property? Caitlin answered that earlier. The city of Lakewood owns it today and will be transferred to the developer. Will the hospital building demolition be paid using Lakewood taxpayer money? The short answer to that is no. The master agreement with the Cleveland Clinic and Lakewood Hospital Association set aside $7 million for the redevelopment of this project, which is being utilized towards the
abatement, demolition, and site prep of the property. Is it true that the developer will only need to pay $1 for the property? This is a question that we answered on the downtown development site with a number of resources. The answer is the developer will pay a nominal amount to the city. The important point on this is that the property had a fair market appraisal worth $5.2 million. And the cost to abate and demolish the property is going to be $7 million or more, which means that the site actually does not have value. It's in negative value. So just to dispel any concerns related to that, the fair market appraisal was really the key third-party distinction on that. What is going to happen to homes on the blocks of Bell and Marlowe located between Detroit and Franklin? They're going to remain single-family, privately owned homes outside of the two homes that were brought up this evening on Marlowe. If homes need to be demolished to allow space for the development, will the current residents be adequately compensated? Again, there are no additional homes than what has gone over tonight. Hopefully the site plan is very clear on what the scope of the entire project is. The project plan indicates that 5 acres of public space will be used in addition to the commercial product that's being proposed. There might be a typo. There's a half acre of public space that's required, and that's been talked about tonight. How will the construction be managed to minimize damage to the streets from heavy equipment? We will develop a construction management plan related to the demolition, and we'll schedule a community meeting with the neighbors on Marlowe and Bell to go over that plan. Once the project is completed, how will traffic be managed? That will primarily be addressed through this process with the traffic study. And does the Planning Commission have any commitments from commercial space tenants? That's a great question. That's primarily up to the developer. They've just started doing a lot of the outreach with their retail and office tenants, brokerage firms, and so hopefully that'll start to shake out over the coming months as well.
Mr. Chair, Bryce just read the comments from Donna. We also received questions from Jan, and those many of those have been responded to via email. But those comments were given to you and will be made part of the record.
Thank you. Any other discussion among the Planning Commission members for this evening? It's a lot. Again, I just wanted to thank everybody for the applicant for walking us through this first reveal of what's to be many more meetings, for all the public that was here and their comments, thoughtful comments, polite comments. I can't emphasize how much we appreciate that. It doesn't always go that way. So we're looking forward to talking about this at our future meeting and also at the design review level 2, which is next Thursday night. Is that correct?
Correct.
So next, Mr. Chair, next Thursday, September 13th at 5:30 in this same room, the Architectural Board of Review will review this project. And where we talked about land use a lot tonight, the Architectural Board of Review is going to be focused on design and architecture. As we know tonight, we're still in building mass form, so we're not going to get into a ton of details, but their focus is going to be around design and architecture next week.
So at this point in the agenda, is it appropriate for us to make and pass a motion to defer to a future meeting?
Yeah. I'll make a motion to defer.
I'll second.
Motion and second to defer to a future meeting. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No opposed. It passes. Thank you very much. And our final group of items on the agenda tonight is docket number 092518, and that is located at 14115 Detroit Avenue. And it is a series of 3 requests. One is for conditional use, and one is for a parking plan review, and one is for a approval of a drive-through at a location of a restaurant. So first thing I would like to do is invite the applicant to come forward and give us a little background about the project by stating your name and letting us know a little bit more about your application. And thank you for your patience.
Yes. Drew Gatliff, 1062 Ridge Street, Columbus, Ohio, 43215. I am with Raising Cane's Ohio. So we are the Ohio franchise for Raising Cane's. And I know one of the things that as we've been growing into the Northeast Ohio market is people are not familiar with what Raising Cane's is. And we've had a lot of questions on what they are, how they can be successful, or how we can be successful with having as limited a menu as we do. So part of this presentation addresses who we are as a company. Thank you. So our motto is One Love, which you'll see throughout building elements or through the architectural review board or board review it will show. So our concept, as mentioned, we have a very limited menu: chicken fingers, French fries, coleslaw, Texas toast, and cane sauce, and fresh squeezed lemonade daily. One Love, quality chicken finger meals, fresh, never frozen, premium chicken fingers, so that's just chicken tenders, marinated, hand battered, cooked to order. It started in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, right outside of LSU, and that was in 1996. It was brought to Ohio on right off campus of Ohio State in 2004. Since then, and I believe that they were at roughly 30 locations at that point. In 2003, 2004, when our founder for Raising Cane's Ohio moved back, we are currently at 28 locations with 3 under construction currently. So we'll be at 31 just in Ohio area. Nationwide, there are 370, between 370 to 400 locations nationwide, with the goal of being at 600 by the end of the year 2020. So very, very fast growing restaurant that is again, something that a lot of people don't know, that Raising Cane's is as big as it is just because it's not in the Northeast Ohio area. Todd Graves, this is our founder of Raising Cane's. So this is his vision. One of the big things that we do is culture and active community involvement. So 2 things that we'll discuss. Vision, mission, all of that here. Just a little bit about what we are, our crew, community. We have a very, very strong following. People call it a cult following. Here's our active community involvement. So we are very involved in every community that our restaurants are in. So we are not a chain that puts restaurants, 3 in a community. We believe in 1 restaurant per community, and it is that community's restaurant. Not saying Cleveland, but 1 Lakewood restaurant, and then it would be devoted to the Lakewood community. So one of the things that we are involved in with education is both with staff as well as spirit nights and things like that to raise money for school, as well as incentive programs for students. Very involved in feeding the hungry, pet welfare. That's the namesake of our company is Raising Cane. It's a dog, and so we're very active in community or pet welfare. active lifestyle, entrepreneurship, since our founder started this, and people said there was no way it would succeed because it's such a limited menu. So he's very key to making sure that he's producing entrepreneurship for everybody else. And this is just where, again, where the locations are, and we'll get into the actual site plan now. So our proposal is the existing, we are in agreement, in a lease agreement with LRC Realty, and a representative is here from them as well tonight. They would be leasing us the property. We would be raising the existing Bob Evans and constructing a new restaurant. The reason for needing to raise and reconstruct versus reuse the existing building is the existing building just isn't set up for a restaurant with a drive-through. And for us, drive-through is roughly 50 to 60%, depends on the location, obviously, but usually 50 to 60% of our traffic is through the drive-through. That being said, we are planning on a larger footprint here than knowing that there is a lot of pedestrian traffic, there's a lot of public transportation in the area. It's a residential or a pedestrian-friendly community. It's a very residential-heavy community. So we do plan on having larger dining room as well, with 76 seats on the interior. We're allowed to have 19. We'll probably have 18, so we don't have a single on the exterior and under a patio. And that is one of the driving forces for leaving a lot of the remaining parking. We just met with the ABR, and we did discuss a lot of options on reducing the amount of parking. What we are proposing in this plan that you see today is 49 spaces. What we've talked about is removing the southernmost parking spaces, pushing the building back. What that does is allows for, and removing 2 spaces on the northern, I don't know if there's a laser, was it his laser pointer? And it's okay if it was his. Sure. These 2 parking spaces here, and then 2 would be removed here, but as we shift everything back, they would get added down here. So what what that ends up being would be 34 proposed parking spaces, as opposed to the 49 that are currently shown. One thing I do want to address, and I understand that we are a new development, and the Bob Evans was developed under a former code. They do have 67 existing spaces. If the building were just repurposed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but would they have to meet current zoning or current parking code if they just put new signage up and open up a new restaurant in its space?
No.
Okay.
It's the redevelopment that's causing the code to kick in.
Yep, and that's fine. And I just wanted to, because we've gotten a lot of questions about why would that building get torn down? So there is still a lot of value in the existing building, but if that existing building stayed, they wouldn't have to do anything to the parking. So they would still be allowed to have the 67 spaces that are currently there. The drive-through, we do show a double lane drive-through, 2 order boards to facilitate traffic, or to facilitate our anticipated volume through. As we mentioned, we do a lot of, or most of our business through the drive-through. One thing that's pulling the building away from Detroit, which we had obviously kept it up because we know that there are minimum setbacks or maximum setbacks from the right-of-way. So we try to keep it as close as possible along Detroit. And so by pushing it back, which was the ABR's suggestion, it does give us a little bit more room on Parkhaven Row for additional cars if they would back up because they can't turn onto Detroit Avenue. I think that's it. A landscaping plan here, which shows a rain garden. There are areas on the landscaping plan that show, landscaping by owner, and we'll have a more detailed plan, obviously, with that. One thing I do want to note is that this area right here is where the patio seating is proposed. Unfortunately, it's shown with landscaping there, but that would be a covered patio with lighting and fans and heaters, and it would be an outdoor dining area, dining experience there. And I can show a photo of that. Those are just enlarged. This is what is the proposed. So this is actually a photo that was taken last week at the recently constructed restaurant in Bentonville, Arkansas. And the reason that part is important is because they just went through a whole design change. And so the patio wasn't part of anything that is currently constructed. Or that type of patio wasn't. So if you go to any other locations in Ohio, you're just not going to find this. And so that's why I wanted to make sure I showed the photo. But that's a new design element that they just came out with. And that's all that I have.
Thank you, Drew. Caitlin, did you want to walk us through, I think I may have skipped over a step, but if you want to walk us through the three specific actions that we're being asked to consider and how they relate to each other.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do have three separate requests for tonight for this project. The conditional use for a drive-through facility, a parking plan review because the applicant is over the maximum number of spaces for their building size, and then the conditional use for outdoor dining. Tonight, we're really going to focus on the first two items and not talk as much about the outdoor dining portion, which is relatively minor compared to the first two. So we'll go through some of the code for those. Again, this is at Detroit and Parkhaven at the former Bob Evans site. Their proposed layout. Some existing photos of what is there. So the first request is a conditional use for a drive-through. There are a lot of code requirements for this. In Chapter 1161, there are general standards for conditional uses. Considering how this would change the essential character of the neighborhood, making sure that adequate measures have been taken to minimize traffic congestion on the streets, and make sure that it's consistent with the general objectives for the zoning district. So these are the general standards for any conditional use that is approved. And then in 116103Y, we have listed the specific code requirements for a drive-through facility. So obviously you can't read this very well, but there are a lot of specific things that have to be complied with to have a drive-through facility. To summarize, the equipment shall not be located within 50 feet of a residence. No drive-through facility can be open from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., so it has to close at 10 p.m. A traffic impact analysis is needed. This has not been received yet, and so that is one of the reasons we're requesting a deferral on this item to allow time for the traffic impact analysis. We need to ensure acceptable flow of traffic. A photometric or lighting study is needed. A 10-foot landscape buffer against residential is required. 20-foot stacking spaces need to be added, and per 1143.13, there needs to be 10 stacking spaces per drive-through lane. So 10 stacking spaces at 20 feet each. The turning movements need to be considered, and then pedestrian crossings as well. So this was the first request, and for the drive-through, and I'll go on to the parking plan review. Are there any questions on this portion of the code? So for the parking plan review, looking for the review and approving of a parking plan. As mentioned, with the existing site layout, there are 48 spaces provided. This is a variance of 39 spaces from the parking maximum. Per the square footage of the building, there are 9 maximum spaces. So this drives us into the code to a parking plan. In 114301, it explains the purpose. We want to, again, use the community vision to guide our decision here. And the parking requirements are designed to accommodate average day-to-day demand as opposed to peak demand. Planning Commission reviews applications for parking plans that don't meet the set schedule in the code, and needs to consider each of these things, which will be part of a future analysis. So available surface parking in the neighborhood, the total number of employees for this business, the total number of tables to parking spaces, which will be important for this restaurant use, and then peak demand and the traffic impact analysis. With any exceptions to the required maximum, there's a list of items that would allow for us to exceed, or for an applicant to exceed the maximum, but they do need to go kind of above and beyond in one of these other areas of the code. So some of the options are treating additional water quality volume on the site, installing streetscape improvement for public use, an innovative landscaping plan, or exploring shared parking with neighboring businesses. So these are the items we would want to encourage the applicant to look into to exceed that maximum parking number. Are there any questions on the parking plan review? So again, we won't talk about outdoor dining tonight, really, but they are allowed 19 seats outside per the code with 76 inside.
Thank you, Caitlin. Any general questions from planning commission members?
I'll just make one observation. Mr. Chair, the patio on the front, makes it less, but makes less fast food looking. That makes it more like an establishment that could be any number of type of businesses. And that with the space being available on this lot for that, I think it's a very fine amenity. I mean, Winking Lizard is sort of category right there, and also has an outdoor lot. I think it fits in the neighborhood having it out front.
It sounds like, to me, that there's going to be an amended site plan presented to show that feature, as well as some other changes that might be forthcoming, so.
I have some questions for the applicant.
We can take questions for later. We're going to have public comment. And then we'll do questions. Okay. Are we ready for public comment on your side of the table?
Yes.
Okay, good. So again, as we did before, I'd like to invite public comment. Again, state your name and your comments, and we'll jot down the questions, and then we'll try to answer them all in a group. So please feel free to come forward.
So, just to clarify, are the cars coming in from Detroit and exiting Parkhaven? I don't have my glasses on, I apologize.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Okay, so we actually have the house that is situated right next to Gecko, and we've had a lot of issues with loitering and the noise pollution and things like that. So my concerns lie, I know they have like time restrictions, but are they going to have a fence or anything to kind of block the lighting coming through? Because I know like Gecko uses a fence where it's staggered, but the lights still come through as they're making turns and things of that nature. My other concern is when we come to enter our street, and being that the exit's right there, I feel there's going to be a lot of traffic potentially backing up. And I think that would really, inconvenience everybody that lives on the street.
Can you state your name for the
Oh,
record,
I'm so
please?
sorry. Yes,
That's
it's
okay.
Autumn.
That's okay. Autumn, on the first question, are you talking about the south property line or the?
Across the street, I think.
Directly across the street from the end of the parking lot, right there, yes.
That's your house?
Yes.
But the fence you're talking about to block the lighting, would that be this back property
Yes.
line or the Park Haven side?
The Park Haven side. I think that's really the noise pollution, and then obviously the traffic impacts, I think, is our biggest concern at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Paula Reed, 1208 Manor Park. I'm also tonight speaking on behalf of Ian Andrews for Lakewood Alive and the Downtown Lakewood Business Association. So I'm going to first read Ian's comments, and then as a resident of the neighborhood, I'm going to make a couple comments of my own. Ian's, point number 1, this goes against the design guideline standards we worked with the planning department in 2010 to adopt, which places the pedestrian first and seeks to minimize the impact of cars on the neighborhood. Guidelines moved us from car-centric development, and this goes against that. Number 2, the drive-through will cause significant traffic issues at Park Haven and Detroit. Only 2 cars can stack at the intersection before blocking the drive-through exit. Right-hand turns will take long enough, but for those making a left, this will back up cars on Park Haven, cars coming out of Get-Go, and cars in the drive-through. Get-Go has a no left turn onto Detroit, so cars circulate through the gas station and come out onto Park Haven Road to be able to make that turn onto Detroit. Number 3, it doesn't appear that the stacking requirements for the drive-through lanes can be met. Number 4, this is adjacent to an already dangerous intersection at Manor Park in Detroit. Number 5, how does this development help us become the most healthy city in America? Number 6, since they have a successful franchise near Ohio State that doesn't have a drive-through, can we possibly emulate that? Number 7, is there a way to reuse the Bob Evans building instead of creating a ton of waste and energy to tear down a building that is only 5 years old and build new? So those are Ian's comments. I want to speak a little bit about the intersection of Manor Park and Detroit and how very difficult that intersection is, both as a pedestrian and as a driver. It's a very visually distracting intersection, and when Domino's has cars parked out front, that building, it's a problem seeing there. When their semi is making deliveries, it's impossible. You have to inch out into that intersection trying so carefully not to then have a car coming the other direction. Ever since the traffic light was removed there, that has really become a difficult spot. There's a lot of pedestrians, seniors coming from the westerly, and although the hawk light is better than what was there before, it has not served to be effective. I was crossing on Labor Day, actually, there at the hawk light. It was red, and I was in the middle of the street, and a car just blew by me going west. So that's a really dangerous intersection, and you have a false sense of security because you have the walk light, but the cars really are not obeying that all the time. And just increasing the amount of traffic at that intersection would be very difficult. I'm glad to hear that you're doing a traffic study. I think that's really important. So those are my comments.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sean McDermott, 1490 Arthur Avenue. And wanted to speak on a few points quickly, and talking about all this chicken, I think it probably made us pretty hungry, and you're probably all ready to go home. So we'll make it quick. First of all, I think from the standpoint of the developer and having partaken in some commercial projects in Lakewood in the past, I think it's good to see a developer who is coming in and trying to adhere as much as possible in a site that may actually make some sense for what they're proposing in terms of traffic concurrency, and we actually have, this is probably the widest Detroit gets in the whole city, so if there's anywhere to put a use like this, although it may not be the best, it does make somewhat some sense. With that, and to Paula's point, from the design guidelines, I really think that we need to take a step back, and if you're charged with approving this parking plan, looking at some of those design guidelines and making sure that we really adhere to them. And the two that really speak the loudest here is putting the pedestrian first and reducing the impact of parking. It sounds like ABR and the staff are already working on those things, but your approval of the parking plan is paramount to that. So a few things that I think we can improve on. You know, when we look at how the Social Security building was developed, they maximized parking. They didn't think about the pedestrian at all. Bob Evans, unfortunately, did kind of the same thing. We've got a very wide aisle here, and we are not planning for how you, especially if you have a family, get from your parking space, if you're not parked exactly next to the building, across stacking aisles or across a wide aisle to the building. So look at Drug Mart down on Grace, look at CVS on Arthur. They have pedestrian overlays on those plans that get people from parking spaces to the front, side, or rear doors. So I think that's an important asset that can be brought to this plan. And the other is the lever and leverage that you have now, not granting the conditional use yet, where we've seen a lot of commercial property owners and developers come in, develop, get a conditional use, and then not maintain their properties, not maintain the landscaping that's associated, not maintain the buffers, and it's hard to bring them back, and it's hard to hold their feet to the fire to maintain these properties in a first-class manner. You have that ability now to write that into the approval, and we hope you take that very seriously, because it's likely to go forward, but at the same time, we can have promises that, yes, we're going to maintain this property, it's going to be beautiful, but you have to have the ability to bring them back and call them on that when and if it isn't maintained properly. Thanks again for your service. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sean.
Hi, my name is Alan Lamb. My wife was up here earlier. We live in that first house to the right there. I know that Get-Go, when they built that, they put a sign or something up that says no left turns out there because Park Haven is a dead-end street. But people still do it anyways, and they'll turn around in people's driveway. So my biggest concern is the way that they have their exit for the drive-through, how it dumps off on Park Haven. People are, even if they have a sign up, people are still going to make a right turn out of there, and they're going to have to turn around someone's driveway. So I don't know if they can have the drive-through exit dump out onto Detroit instead, because traffic's going to back out either way if it dumps off on Park Haven. That's all.
Thanks, Alan.
Good evening, Jean McKay, 13428 Lake Avenue. One thing I would really like to suggest is that we require some really good street trees down there, because it's a really sunny zone, really not fun for a pedestrian or a biker to, be out there. It's really full of concrete and it's hot. And we're just trying to, get our trees back in the city, our tree canopies on our main commercial district streets as well as our side streets and residential streets. So thank you.
My name's Matt Herberger, 1448. Do I need to re-sign this? I was already signed in for the last, just once.
No, you don't need to.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. It looks like, going over what you did, I looked at the same stuff in the zoning code of Lakewood, came to some of the same conclusions. Obviously, a drive-through is a conditional use, which gives, I think, the city of Lakewood some latitude into what we can grant. I don't think this property, the way it's designed, it's not satisfactory for that use, particularly because Park Haven is not a through street, because the narrowness of the lot. I think you're going to have issues, and I would like to go into, I know there's going to be a traffic study done, and I don't think it should be just relegated just to Park Haven and Detroit, but I think it should also encompass the impact it will have on Bunce Road, because the reality of the matter is that most of the traffic that's going to go to this facility would be going up or down Bunce Road. Since the closure of Lakewood Hospital, Bunce Road is the major thoroughfare for emergency vehicles, particularly ambulances on their way to Fairview. I know that because I live on that street. And the impact already with Get-Go on emergency traffic is problematic. I think when you add this into it, you're endangering public welfare and safety, which is part of the code. So I think that traffic study really needs to encompass something more than just Park Haven, because clearly it's going to affect Park Haven detrimentally, and I don't know that it meets that obligation. But I think additionally you have that problem that traffic will be impacting Bunce Road. I wonder about noise disturbances as well. As far as the setback of that, I only have anecdotal evidence from the McDonald's on Woodward, but from what I've understood, the actual sound from the drive-through can be heard on that street, on the abutting residential property. I believe in the code, there are noise levels that are required to be met. So I would think that there would have to be a study done on that to determine if it meets the code as far as what levels of decibels that reaches. And then I just want to point out just a couple things, couple of cases, if anybody wants to look into them. Case law, Bellis versus the Planning Board of Weymouth, Massachusetts, 2002. In the matter of Hobbs versus Albanese, New York, 1979. And then a really good one is Best Eaten Donut Flour Company, Inc. versus Zoning Board of Review of Town of Westerly, Rhode Island, 2000, which is a very good read. So I just wanted to add those to the record if anybody wanted to look into those and see how they impact the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Adam Steyer, 1430 Bunce. My house is the house closest to the Get-Go on Bunce Road. I would echo what many of my neighbors have already said. To avoid redundancy, I'll just hit a couple points that I haven't quite heard yet. One of those is that as someone who travels on Park Haven quite regularly, if I get gas and then I'm at the Get-Go and I'm going to go to the library or something, that left turn, it's a stop sign at that intersection. That left turn is a bear to make, even when you're the first car and it's a Tuesday afternoon or something, you know. I am glad you're doing the traffic study. I would expect it's going to show that there will be some trouble on Park Haven and maybe Detroit and Bunce as well. Someone already mentioned you can't make a left turn out of the Get-Go, so that many people do exactly what I do, leave the Get-Go on Park Haven, then hang a left on Detroit if that's the direction they're going. And with cars coming through that drive-through, I just see that being something of a nightmare potentially. The other point I wanted to make was just a general one. So I have 3 young kids. One of the things that drew me to Lakewood, I'm a 5-year resident now, is of course the walkability, which we tout and love. I know I'm not the only one in the city who admires Lakewood for that. And one of the nice things about the walkability of Detroit is that I can let my kids who are learning how to ride their bikes or just toddle around between intersections, you know, stray, walk, we can do so with security and a feeling of safety from intersection to intersection, and then we talk about looking both ways before you cross the street and all that good stuff. I would just urge the city to, you know, we talk a lot about walkability to communicate at the very least in a more effective way with residents about how we think about drive-throughs as a city and how that does or doesn't fit into our vision. I go online, as I know a lot of people do, to try to find news about the city, and I've heard things about when McDonald's came in and all that kind of stuff. And so I would just like the city to, at the very least, do a better job communicating with us about where drive-throughs fit, if not, you know, being stringent about their use, ideally. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Sorry, just wanted to add something real quick. Matt Herberger, Bunce Road. I just wanted to say, I don't have a particular problem with Raising Cane's or raising their chicken. I actually have never eaten there. I think the issue is, to me, is the drive-through. So certainly if, you know, I'm not opposed to a restaurant being there. I think that it's the drive-through that's the sticking point. I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. All right, once again, thank you, everybody. We'll close the public comment portion. I think we have a lot of very good points that we heard again on this topic. I know we also have some questions amongst the Planning Commission. I don't know if we can talk about them tonight or at a future meeting, but I think we could, I don't know if all of these can be answered tonight or not, or if any of them can, but certainly, Caitlin, if you want to maybe run through a couple of the common themes that we heard. I don't know if the applicant's prepared to answer any of those or not. But.
Yeah, I'm sure the applicant, as they hear these and ABR's comments, will have to make adjustments. But just to run through some of the comments we've heard tonight and some themes, there's definitely a traffic concern for the exit onto Park Haven, especially left turns. This traffic concern extends both east to Manor Park in that intersection and then west to Bunce as well. So making sure that we look at not just this Park Haven-Detroit intersection, but potentially expanding that. There are concerns about lighting and noise pollution. So again, as part of this, a lighting photometric study will have to be completed, which will help address some of the light problem. There are a lot of questions about noise pollution. I don't know if you have any things that you've done to address noise pollution in other areas that you could touch on.
Do you want me to answer now?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if you wanted me to wait. So from a noise pollution standpoint, a lot of the noise that we have is from the, you know, obviously the drive-through menu boards, which we will have restricted hours, obviously, that is part of the restriction on having a drive-through near residential property. So we would have that. Additionally, we would screen that area. The drive-through has to be screened from the right-of-way as it is, but we would do, you know, taller, a mix of lower shrubs as well as street trees and things to intercept, you know, all directions that the sound waves go, as opposed to just having low where they just go right over top. But that would be how we would address that. But again, the majority of the noise that would be coming from that would be, you know, restricted hours at night. So.
Thank you. Another common theme that we've heard is the design guidelines and standards that have been put together, especially the point of putting the pedestrian first, and how the pedestrian would be accommodated here and the walkability of this area. Have you put any considerations into pedestrian experience on this site?
Yeah, to address some of, well, a couple of points. One is what our parking plan has, or how it would negatively affect the surrounding area, the residential streets around. And one of the things is if we would limit and we would only go to 9 parking spaces, what that would do is any public parking that would be there would be taking up, any parking on our lot would be taken up by the amount of employees we would have on any given shift, given, amount, some will travel via public transportation or bicycle, but that would leave not a whole lot or very little for any patrons to be there. So I know it goes back to the point of adding or leaving some of the parking that's existing there, or what we're proposing, so that we can accommodate that without overflowing onto Parkhaven Row, all the street parking on Parkhaven Row, all street parking elsewhere. Our goal is obviously not to be a burden on any surrounding property owners or any surrounding businesses or any surrounding residences or anything. And without providing sufficient parking, we feel we would cause that, which is a concern of ours. From a pedestrian standpoint, by moving, I know there's discussion about moving the building back, and we are all for that. What we would like to propose there is an additional landscaping along, similar to what I know it's a rain garden at Get-Go, but we would have something that would engage the pedestrian traffic there, whether that's park benches, whether that's something that is more of an engaging, not just a rain garden. That's not the idea of putting up there. As far as parking, from the parking spaces on the perimeter, talking about the west perimeter, since the south perimeter would be, we've been talking about removing that parking altogether. We could provide, crosswalks from that west over. There is a sidewalk adjacent that runs the full length of the parking along the east, to provide that so that there is a cross through over the drive aisle. Unfortunately, we have to have drive aisles in order to get to a parking space, so it's impossible to prevent entirely, but we'll definitely address it with providing crosswalks wherever we can to get them safely to a sidewalk, to be there. And then we would provide, we're leaving the existing sidewalks along Parkhaven and Detroit, in hopes that, and hoping that we can also improve that streetscape.
Real quick, how many employees per shift?
It's 10 to 15. Midday, lunch shift in the midweek is going to be less than your weekends shift.
Got it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Have you considered reusing the building at all?
We have. As I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, it's just not designed for a drive-through, and our business is that we do 50 to 60% of our business through a drive-through. I know it was mentioned about the location across the street from Ohio State that is successful without a drive-through. That is true. That location is successful. It is an inline location. So it's not taking up an acre of, we're not paying for an acre there. We are paying much less because it's a square footage price for an inline location. The other thing with that is I know there's a lot of pedestrian traffic here, but there are 45,000 students on campus at Ohio State that many of them do not have cars, so their only mode of transportation is walking. And they have that location is a late night location, so it's open to get those all-night studiers. That traffic as well. So that leads to the success of that location.
There has been some concern too about how you keep people from turning right onto Park Haven from the drive-through. Has there been any consideration for the drive-through exit to Detroit?
There was consideration to, initially, what we would love to do is have a traditional drive-through layout that has it come back, swoop around the front side. But in trying to keep with that streetscape, it really makes that more of a suburban design, which pulls it away from the street. It pulls, a drive lane between the front of the building and Detroit. We would not be able to exit the drive-through onto Detroit with the proximity of Park Haven. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that we would only have, with this exact design, but even if we shifted it over, I think we would only have like a maximum of 40 feet between Park Haven and the curb cut, which would be problematic.
Two questions around landscaping. Have you done extensive landscaping at other locations that you have had to maintain? Are you guys committed to maintaining landscaping? And then also, there's a comment on street trees and how hot this area is, and it's not great for pedestrians. Have you thought about including those in the design?
Yes. So to answer the first one, we take a lot of pride in our the appearance of our facility, which is not just the building itself. We are firm believers that your first impression is the moment you step foot or drive onto the property. And so we have extensive landscaping. We typically are one of the better landscaped, best landscaped amongst your traditional quick service with a drive-through restaurants. So we do take a lot of pride in that. We maintain it. We get assessed from corporate. They come 4 times a year, and they assess our facility. Obviously, all the interior, exterior, landscaping is included in that. And so with poor assessments, we are penalized as a franchisee, and the operators are also penalized for poor assessments. The street trees, as we talked about, we are planning to engage the, adding landscaping along Detroit. If there are areas within the public right-of-way that trees can be added, we're more than happy to do that. I don't know that there are, but we would definitely propose a lot of trees along Park Haven, where we have a landscape buffer between the drive-through area and the right-of-way. And then we would also do the same again up along Detroit.
We also had a few comments emailed to us, both from Benny, you, and Anita, and these will be added to the meeting minutes as a matter of public record. There were a few questions from Anita that I thought you could address with us. Her concern was with trash, especially with the outdoor dining area and trash blowing around the neighborhood.
Our operators, we have people that are dedicated, when during their shift, that they have to maintain, they have to manage all the tables. So there's not going to be, trash blowing off of the tables, including the exterior. If somebody walks away with a cup, off of our property. We hope that they would not. We provide trash cans outside. We provide trash cans inside. We hope that they are courteous enough to throw those away in our trash cans, or if they decide to take those elsewhere, that they throw them away in another trash can. But we do everything that we can from our capabilities to again, maintain that pristine facility.
Another concern that was brought up was the smell or air quality and having the smell of fried chicken and French fries. Do you have any remediation for smells?
No. I mean, we have an exhaust that is on the roof, exactly the same as any other facility that makes food. So Bob Evans, currently, if it smells like bacon and sausage and eggs, or across the street, it's just we have an exhaust hood that exhausts it.
Those were the questions I had.
Thank you, Caitlin. Any comments?
I have a few questions. And I know you probably won't be able to answer all of them tonight. What is your volume at peak hours, broken down by drive-through and dining on site? Approximately how long does it take to complete a drive-through order? Where and when will delivery trucks make their deliveries? Has there been any thoughts to providing pedestrian access from Park Haven? Is there on-street parking on Detroit?
There's.
Would that be included in the total that we're looking at for total parking spaces? Should it be? Or? Okay. And then I just want to confirm that the only ingress is Detroit and the egresses are on Park Haven.
So no, that we are proposing two-way traffic on Detroit and off of Detroit. And we are also proposing two-way traffic onto and off of Park Haven.
Okay, so that brings up another concern. I'm not an engineer, but the turn radius for vehicles coming in through Park Haven and going into the drive-through looks really tight.
Yes, for the southernmost lane, it would be very tight, but they would be able to make the turn into the northern lane.
So then, I guess when you're competing with vehicles coming from the northern entrance, how would that work? Who would have the right-of-way? And I assume that those coming from the north will want to get into that left lane.
I don't have a great answer for that right now. During our initial grand opening, we obviously have traffic control to help facilitate that. But during, once people develop their habits, develop their driving patterns, develop where they're going, it usually works itself out as far as who has the right of way when you're coming from the opposite directions. We do have a stop sign we were proposing a stop sign at the one that's coming off of Park Haven. So I would imagine that they would not have the right of way until someone would let them in if there is a backup of traffic where a lot of people are coming in at the same time. That's the best answer I have for that portion. Do you want to run through, I'm sorry, can you run through the earlier questions?
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I want to add another one, so I'll start with that.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I also want to know typically how many cars are stacked if you at your establishments that have 2 lanes.
So the two-lane is a newer thing for us, for Raising Cane's in general. The only locations that currently have two lanes are in California, which is a pretty substantially different market than here. But, I mean, in a traditional lane, we try to get 15 to 16 parking, or, stacking spaces for any traditional drive-through, or without two lanes. The two lanes still go down to one, they funnel down to one. So providing 16 cars or stacking for 16 cars, whether you're ordering at two different menu boards or not, you're going down to one pickup and order, or pickup and pay.
So because they're going from 2 to 1.
Yeah.
Do the first 4 cars before they converge count towards both stacking requirement counts, since they're kind of shared together?
Do the double stacking lanes would count towards the total requirement of 10? Is that what your question is?
So if you start from the north, you count the 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're basically sharing those.
So that would be 4, and then right now there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the southern lanes. That'd be 9. Frankly, we have to have a discussion about the drive aisle that's next to where the parking spaces are accessed, and if that can be considered stacking spaces. We have not come to that determination yet.
Okay, because I thought the code said 10 per stack or per drive-through entrance.
And my question, I guess, to clarify, is 10 stacking spaces per drive-through lane if you have one pickup window. Is that one drive-through lane, even if there's 2 order points?
That's a great question. Let us dive into that, Monica. We need to spend time on that nuance.
Okay, I guess I'm just concerned about, we could have stacking, or we could, have stacking overflow in 2 directions, and then cars are blocked in, and further complicates circulation. So. And then did you, I guess the other questions will be in the minutes, right? Yeah.
Will be what? I'm sorry?
The other questions will be in the minutes, so
okay.
I would be happy to list them again.
No, I know a couple of the answers. Talking about the drive-through, you had asked how long for our drive-through per order. So from the order board, we average throughout the day 3 minutes and 20 seconds, but that includes a lot of the non-peak times where everything is truly cooked to order. So as soon as you order, then that's when it's fried. But typically during our peak hours, we are able to shorten those times because they can anticipate 20 cars in a drive-through. They can anticipate how many, chicken fingers to fry at the same time. So we are more in the range of 30 to 45 seconds per car.
From the time they enter the drive-through to the window?
From the point of order. That's the only thing we can do from a consistency standpoint, because we know how far that is.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
Because there's a lot of times that there's way more stacking, and there's a lot of times there's very little stacking. And then for the drive-through, during peak times, we end up, close to 100 cars per hour, which equates to, right around 30 seconds per car.
I don't have any questions. I have an observation again, which is I'm blown away by the people of Lakewood again, and how civil everybody has been 3 hours and 15 minutes this evening into this. It's not like we're approving a Supreme Court justice or anything, but these are highly controversial subjects, and people have been so articulate, and our applicants, including you, Drew, have been so forthcoming that it is an excellent process. It's not always like this, But this has been outstanding, and I want to thank everybody for that. And it's what makes Lakewood a great place.
And I have some comments, you know, as the city dives into this and we see more. It sounds like we're going to see a new site plan, maybe a new look here. And I think some of the points that one of the members of the public, Sean, brought up should be taken into account here, especially as it relates to, you know, what this commission is caused with, which is land use, site circulation, pedestrian safety, traffic, is thinking about, you know, pedestrian walkways delineated on the parking lot to provide a more pedestrian safe way. Maybe in some of those buffers you have closer to Detroit Avenue where it's landscape, maybe a bike box or some sort of bike infrastructure, you know, to kind of invite people and that, you know, some of the consideration in the parking is some sort of public art. You know, bike boxes can have public art incorporated into them. Not necessarily saying that's, you know, just saying it's something that can be incorporated. Also, the trash enclosure seems to be closer to the residential properties. It looks like you just kept what Bob Evans has. You might want to consider moving that away from the residential folks. Maybe, I'm sure your trash smells similar to Bob Evans' trash, but I'm sure they'd appreciate it not being so close to the house. And closer to the commercial corridor. So, some of the things to think about.
So, Caitlin, from a recommendation standpoint, would you recommend that we make 3 different motions, or can we synthesize into one motion, deferring each of the, you want? Thank you very much.
I'll make a motion to defer.
Motion's been made to defer the 3 requests related to this, these 3 docket items. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Lou. Any further discussion tonight? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second. Thank you very much, everybody.